He was a child soldier raised to kill without hesitation. She was the executioner of the Demon King's army. Both were discarded. No medals, no home, just silence. So instead of fighting each other, they start traveling together. Hot springs, shared beds, random demon ambushes, and awkward conversations about feelings neither of them understand. Two weapons who were never taught how to live, trying to learn what peace even means. Will they succeed? Let's go. The story begins with MC running towards the monsters and killing them with his sword. A guy ran away from him, called him a monster, and loudly asked them not to approach him. He mercilessly killed him with one blow, and this shocked his squad members, and one of the girls even vomited from the sight. He turned to them and said that it looks like this was the last enemy. This is Shoto, a warrior with a magic sword. A squad member approached him and said that they had enough. He never thought that he would turn out to be such a ruthless person. From that moment on, he is no longer a member of their group. He was surprised by this, loudly asked him to stop, and asked where he should go then. He looked at him and said that he should think about it himself. Considering how well he manages to deal with people, he could become a bandit. However, if he really decides to become one, his tone became more serious and he said loudly that they would do everything possible to get rid of him. After that, they went their separate ways, and he wondered what he should do now. Up until that moment, all he had done was fight on orders from adults. For starters, it would be nice to find something edible. He heard a sound in the bushes, turned around abruptly and thought, does it look like a small animal? He was surprised when he saw a girl named Satis, who was badly injured. He immediately took out his magic sword and thought that this was the commander of the Demon King's army. He had gotten into trouble more than once because of her cunning traps and magical attacks. He was unlucky to meet her right now. He was going to fight against her, but suddenly she fell to the ground in front of him. He put his sword away and wondered what was going on here. Should he help her? He lifted her onto his back and carried her to a small house in the middle of the forest. She was lying in bed. The protagonist stood next to her and said that it seemed like she had come to her senses. She was very surprised when she saw him and screamed loudly in fear. He immediately took out his weapon and in a wary tone said loudly that she should lie still. He asks her to calm down. She said with horror that she was begging him to spare her. He was a little confused by her strange behavior and thought that right now she was indistinguishable from an inexperienced broken soldier. He hid behind an overturned table, put away his weapon, and said that he would not do anything to her. If he hides like this, will she finally calm down? She calmed down a little and asked, is he the same guy from the group of heroes? He confirmed it, and she asked, is he going to lure her into a trap and kill her, right? He asked, does she seriously think that he would think of such a thing, let alone deceive her? Moreover, now he is not a member of the group of heroes. A lot has happened, by the way. How is she feeling? What's wrong with her? She had always been terribly arrogant. She said it was all because of them. He was a little surprised by this, and she said that, more precisely, she wanted it to be so, but it was all her own fault. If you always oppose a group of heroes, then sooner or later, failure overtakes everyone. She disappointed the Demon King, and therefore was sentenced to death. She was stripped of her status, and after that, endless torture and abuse began. They wanted her to finally regret her existence, and, subsequently, die. She was trampled many times by the monsters that once obeyed her. Her soul was broken. Her whole life instantly turned into a living nightmare. Driven by fear, she decided to try to avoid the death penalty. She escaped from the territory of the Demon King's army and came to this forest. She betrayed the trust of the Demon King. Fearing death, she cowardly ran away. MC thought that now he understood everything. He said that he would tell her his story then too. She said that he didn't need to bother. It was unlikely to be as interesting as her story. He said that he was kicked out of the hero group. She agreed and said that he had already said this. He said that it seemed that his essence was a killer. For as long as he could remember, adults always ordered him to fight. Disobedience could be severely punished, and therefore he tried to follow all their orders. Their attitude towards him became much better when they found out that he was suitable for the magic sword, although he didn't really understand what exactly they were talking about. However, the fact that they became kind was enough. Earlier, a team member said that accepting him into their group turned out to be a terrible mistake. All he can do is fight. He's incapable of teamwork, and killing is his only fun. His essence is a ruthless maniac who deals with both monsters and people. They set out on this journey to save humanity, not for something like that. Brute force alone cannot solve their problems. He asked, but fighting initially involves killing, right? If he doesn't kill, then one day he himself will become a victim. The team member said that he hoped that at least a drop of humanity remained in him. From now on, he is no longer a member of their group. Satis thought that, in fact, it is forbidden to force children to participate in battles in this country. She asked, everything he said, doesn't he think that he can get into even more trouble? He said that there is nothing to worry about. For a country that bans him from entering, he is just an ordinary soldier who was lucky enough to get hold of a magic sword. Besides, he has nowhere to return to and no one to worry about him. She asked, Isn't he upset that all these people turned their backs on him? He said that he doesn't know. What do adults usually do in such situations? She said she didn't understand anything about it. That night, he fell asleep sitting in the same place, and she thought that, unfortunately, she herself didn't know what to do in such situations. In the morning, Shoto woke up and thought that he was late for training. He needed to get ready quickly, right? He didn't have to go to training anymore. She was still sleeping. He carefully opened the door and said that he should look around. He climbed a tree, picked some fruit, and said that today's breakfast would be 2 magnificent fruits. He noticed that she left the house, immediately hid in the bushes, and wondered, however, what was she doing? Satis pointed her finger at him, lifted him into the air with magic, and threw him to the ground in front of her. She said that watching a woman from the bushes was rather indecent. Did he think she wouldn't notice him? He shouldn't forget that she previously led the Demon King's army. Her attention was drawn to the apple he dropped, and he stood up and said that he had found the fruit by chance while looking around. He thought it could be used for breakfast. She liked fruit. He thought monsters preferred meat, so he would share 1 apple with her. She asked why he was helping her, an enemy, and even sharing his food. He said that he had already told her that he was no longer in their group. After being driven out, he had become a common outcast. He was sure that he would be killed if he tried to return to his country. It no longer mattered who was an ally and who was an enemy. She smirked and asked in a serious tone that if he captured her and took her to the king as a prisoner of war, at least that way she could avoid the death penalty, right? The protagonist calmly refused and said that he was pretty tired of this. She was a little embarrassed and asked why he was so calm. He said that he didn't fully understand it himself. She thought that this guy himself seemed to be quite humble. His childish soul was tormented by the horrors of war, and now he simply had nowhere to return. It's the same as hers. They both heard a loud sound, and he asked loudly, "Are those monsters?" She dropped the apple and screamed loudly in fear. He noticed this and thought that she couldn't move. Several monsters came out of the forest and asked what they had here. Wasn't that Lady Satis herself? It was definitely her, who shamelessly fled right before the execution ceremony. And this guy, wasn't he from the group of heroes? They were following the people's tracks, but they didn't think they would stumble upon them. How lucky everything turned out. They would feast on them right here. However, before snacking on them, it would be nice to have some fun with her again. Isn't it wonderful to mock one of the high-ranking officials of the Demon King's army? To tell the truth, he was getting a taste for mocking her. The monster noticed that MC had clenched his hand into a fist, laughed, and asked if he was trying to pretend he wasn't afraid of them. He better hide behind the woman standing next to him. Although she wouldn't be able to fight anymore, all he does is stand there like a pillar. It's time to finish with them. She screamed loudly in fear, and he stood in front of her and told her not to be afraid. Everything would be fine. The monster was indignant at his insolence and quickly ran towards him. He calmly summoned his sword. It appeared from underground and pierced the orc's stomach. Everyone was surprised by this, and the monster was thrown into the air. He jumped towards it, grabbed his sword, and cut the monster in half. He landed, took out his dagger, and got into a fighting stance. Satis looked at the monsters and thought that things were bad. These were quite skilled monsters. Although he had a magic sword, it would not be effective against them. She loudly said that he should run from there right now. He calmly looked at the monsters and said that he had an opening. He ran towards them with incredible speed, killed the first monster, and then defeated the spider with one more blow. She was surprised by this and thought that this sword, a power that is incomprehensible to the human mind, the older it gets, the stronger it goes back to the mythical era. Not all people are capable of mastering this power. If a mage requires magical power, then a swordsman with such a magical sword, in turn, requires a certain amount of skill. Although very rare, people are born who are capable of mastering this skill. A man who appears on the battlefield holding such a sword in his hands will become a true disaster for his enemies. After this, he delivered several more quick strikes with incredible speed, finishing off the surviving monsters. After this, he brushed the blood from the sword and put it into subspace. Satis saw his cold gaze and called him a boy. He looked at her and asked if she was hurt. She thought that even though he had defeated the enemy, she still felt an all-consuming emptiness in his eyes. She asked in a confused tone why he saved her. Shoto said that in battle, he kills or is killed, and he does not want to die. She thought that it was such a simple argument, so that's why he fights. However, what about her? The battlefield was a place where she could show off her strength and enjoy the pain of others. However, now that was all in the past. Her pride was shattered. She clenched her hand into a fist with tension and asked, "He saw it, right?" She was afraid to confront such weak monsters. She couldn't take a single step, appearing in such a pitiful light before her old enemy. She would never have thought that she would be so weak. He said that feeling fear and helplessness on the battlefield was natural. He was like that too. She agreed and said that for humans it was so. But she was a demon. She was much stronger than mere mortals. He asked in a serious tone, does she think there's a difference between demons and humans on the battlefield? The only important thing is that both sides are trying to kill each other. He had seen many adults and children who were broken by the horrors of war. It never occurred to him to laugh or mock them. She said with a sad look that he was so strange. He said that he didn't know why, but he had heard it quite often. She stood up and said with a small smile, that she was now in his debt. What was he going to do next? He said with a thoughtful look that he hadn't decided anything yet, but it seemed he would like to travel. Once upon a time, he heard a story from a mercenary, and since then, he began to dream of his own house. By the way, wouldn't she like to go with him? She was surprised because of this. She couldn't answer, and he asked what was the matter. She had nowhere to go anyway, right? She asked if he was sure about this decision. After all, she had brought him so much trouble in the past. The protagonist said that it was a battlefield. They had no choice but to fight each other. She laughed and said that he was really interesting. Okay. In that case, she suggests traveling together. By the way, what is his name? He said his name, and she said that his name means destruction and storm. Well, she'll introduce herself again. Her name is Satis. They shook hands. She pulled him along with her and said she was glad to meet him. After a while, she was washing herself and said that she never thought she would bathe in a bathhouse again. A couple of hours ago, they were walking through the forest. She looked down and asked if he would stop this already. He was crawling on the ground and said that the Demon King's territory was very close. Maybe they had a sniper there, so she should duck too. She said that the Demon King's army didn't have snipers, so he should get up and walk normally. He agreed and noticed that she squeezed her hand tightly. She was a little surprised when he said that everything would be fine. If monsters appeared again, he would deal with them because it was his duty as a soldier. She asked, but he is no longer a soldier, right? He agreed. After that, they sat under a tree and he asked if she knew how to peel fruit. She agreed and said that it was because she had golden hands. He tried the apple and, surprised, said loudly that it was delicious. She said that he was exaggerating. He probably ate delicious food around the heroes. He denied it and said that he didn't really get along with his comrades. They saved food on him, saying that he didn't know how to do anything except fight. He always ate in the dark so that they couldn't see him. She began to remember the past and thought that after he mentioned it, she remembered how he once fought in a weakened state. Could it be that he was hungry then and fought within his abilities? However, even if they treated him like that, he could safely think of revenge on those heroes, but then why didn't he do it? MC asked if she wouldn't eat. Satis was a little surprised by this and said that she didn't have much of an appetite right now, so he could eat. He asked with his mouth full if she told him to return it later, would it be useless? She asked before speaking. Wouldn't it be better to chew everything first? He apologized and she asked, after they passed through the forest, what would they do? He said that if they left the forest, they would like to go to the city. She said with a cheerful look that if they went to the city, then there was one good place. There was one very famous public bathhouse. She had been keeping an eye on it for a long time. He stood up and asked, is there a time limit there? She gave him the knife and said that there was no time limit, but it is advisable not to linger for too long. Right, to be honest, there are still mixed bathhouses there, aren't there? Don't boys want that? He asked with a puzzled expression. What kind of mixed bathhouses were these? She was surprised by this and said that he was so boring. By the way, he does have money, right? He was even more surprised by this and asked loudly, is this necessary? She said in a calm tone that it was as she thought. She created a magic circle from which coins rained down and said that it was okay because she had money that people used. They should go to the bathhouse today and then stay at the inn for the night. Later, they reached Kurishat, and Satis said that he just shouldn't go out too quickly. Shoto said that she could calm down. They, child soldiers, were ordered to get up to the barracks in 10 seconds. She said that, however, he still had to immerse himself completely and keep his body clean. They reached the bathhouse. He agreed and said that he understood. She lowered herself into the water and said in a contented voice that she seemed to have come back to life. She thought it was somehow strange. She was active in the Demon King's army and looked down on people, and now she was lying like this and relaxing in the bathhouse. Although she had been paying attention to this bathhouse and the city with the intention of attacking and capturing it, if she hadn't met him, she should thank him. I wonder how he is doing, since it's very spacious here, and she's already tired of swimming. At the same time, he stood in the middle of the men's bathhouse and thought that the hot water was perfect, and there was no time limit. He also felt very good. Why not swim then, since everything coincided perfectly? That's it, he can't restrain himself, he'll become a fish. The man put his hand on his shoulder, called him over, and said that, in fact, swimming was prohibited here. He was surprised by what he heard, turned around and loudly asked what he said. After that, they sat down in the water, and he said that he hadn't seen him here before. Was he a traveler? The protagonist sat next to him and said something like that. He said with a smile that there was a good bathhouse here. It immediately relieved fatigue. Even if he was a seasoned warrior, a battle on a hot summer day could be very tiring. But the bathhouse is a different matter. He asked if he was a mercenary. He just didn't look like a regular army soldier. The man agreed and said that he just wanted to live peacefully. He looked thoughtful and said that he did too, that he wanted to visit many places and someday have his own home. He said with a smile that he had a good dream. Did he want to make it come true with that beautiful girl? He was very surprised by what he heard and quickly jumped away from him. And the man said that he should calm down. He wasn't going to pester her. He admitted that he said too much, but there was no need to make an enemy out of him. He hung the towel over his shoulder and said with a smile that, however, if he really wanted to fight him, then they could do it on the battlefield. MC looked at him and thought that one way or another, this man was not an ordinary person. He asked what his name was. He started to leave the bathhouse and said that he could call him Holmes. When he left the bathhouse, Satis said that they had bathed for quite a long time. It seems like we should head out, right? The two of them came to the tavern, and she said that she suggests they stop by there. She was very hungry. He walked alongside and asked what that smell was coming from there. She said that she was very glad that they came here. They sat down at the table. They were brought food and he loudly asked if it was even possible to eat. She agreed and said that he could eat as much as he wanted. It was as gratitude for today. He asked, did she say gratitude? She asked with a happy expression. Didn't he save her? She is still alive only thanks to his help. He started eating the meat and said loudly that in that case he wished her bon appetit. He called her over with a very pleased expression on his face and said that it was amazing. The meat was so soft he had never eaten anything like it. She was also eating her dish and said that he should take his time and eat slowly, because the food would not run away. She noticed that he stopped and asked if something was wrong. He asked with a thoughtful look, isn't this what they called the rules of table etiquette? Usually, noble people observe this. She was surprised and said that he knew about that too. She couldn't figure out if he was an adult or a child. At least he was capable of changing. He was a little surprised by this and said that maybe that was true. Thanks to the use of a magic sword, he always fought with adults. It seemed that he became like this because of his environment. She wondered if he imitated them? Isn't this the reason why his views are completely different from those of a child? Shoto unexpectedly said to her that this is why he envies her. While he fought, imitating adults, he didn't understand who he really was. That's why she can be angry or laugh, but he envies her. She thought that he had changed after all. Even though they are not in the best situation now, his openness helps not to think about it. He has not only warrior instincts, but also humanity. A shining crystal with which he was born and changed its form, trying to survive in this harsh world. She is sure that it is his own tormented soul. However, others found it difficult to understand. After they ate, Shoto thanked her and said that the food was excellent. Satis said that there was no need for thanks. Besides, she was able to get to know him better. He looked at her and asked what she learned. She asked, probably that he is a wonderful person. He was very surprised by this, blushed and loudly asked what she was suddenly doing. She laughed and asked if he was having fun. He agreed and said that it was exactly that. It was a feeling of joy. He didn't even think that he could have so much fun in everyday life. She asked, in that case, maybe they should take a little walk, or did he want to go back to the hotel and rest? He said with an embarrassed expression that he would like to take a leisurely walk with her. She was surprised by this and asked with a smile if he had really decided to court her. It seemed that he was serious now. He was indignant because of this and said loudly that he didn't understand what she was talking about at all. She said that she agreed, taking a walk around the city at night. It wasn't such a bad idea. She extended her hand to him and said that especially if he suggested it. He took her hand. They walked down the street and he wondered what this was. He felt such feelings for the first time. At the same time, in the group of heroes, they were quickly running away from something, and Reed loudly asked how this could have happened. Their leader, with a tense expression, thought that they hadn't done anything wrong. Earlier, when they were surrounded by a crowd of monsters, they loudly said that there were too many of them. They shouldn't panic. They needed to spread out and destroy the enemy. A girl named Angelica began to chant a spell, but noticed that a monster was attacking her and jumped to the side. She loudly said that she didn't have time to use the technique. Someone needed to distract them so she could use magic. Hudora fought against the monsters, asked for forgiveness, and said that, however, she could barely cope here herself. He clenched his sword in his hand, delivered a powerful blow, and killed the monster. Makran screamed loudly when he saw the crowd of monsters and pointed it out for everyone to pay attention. Reed looked at this and loudly said that there were too many of them. They should retreat and run from here right now. Angelica turned to him and said loudly, they have their things with them. He said loudly that at this rate, they would soon be killed. Someone had to cover the retreat. With the number of enemies, it was simply impossible. Later, they stopped in the forest, and he thought that they had gone too far from the Demon King's territory. She fell to the ground and said loudly that she had had enough. What even happened? She had lost her provisions and everything. Are they saying that in order to get everything back, they need to go back? She had had enough? The others asked her to calm down and said that despite this, they were caught off guard when they were attacked. She pointed a finger at them and said loudly that, in fact, it was their fault from the very beginning. If they had distracted the enemy, none of this had happened. Reed called her and asked if she would shut up already. She turned to him and asked loudly, was he telling her to shut up? Actually, the responsibility lies with him, and the mistake is also his. Why did they decide to exile that guy at a time like this? He remembered the main character and asked, was she talking about him? She agreed and said loudly that their firepower dropped after he was kicked out. If he had been in that battle, the situation would have been different. Even if they couldn't break through, at least they could have retreated calmly and wouldn't have been so exhausted. He said that wouldn't do. His power wasn't the power that could save humanity, but only killing. She asked loudly, if he said something like that, Then didn't he think that his power would come in handy in a tough fight? Hudora went to her and said that she should stop blaming him. Everyone agreed to exclude him from the group, didn't they? Angelica turned to her and said that this was the voice of a commoner who only knew how to swing her fists. Did she know that she was also responsible? She raised her head and asked how she was going to continue traveling with such terrible combat training. She got angry about this, pushed her hand away, and said that she didn't care if she blamed her, but if she insulted her father's martial arts, then she began to draw her sword from its sheath and said loudly that she would not care if they were friends. Makarin called them loudly and said that they should calm down. Quarreling would not change anything. They should be content with the fact that they survived. They should just rest now, and then they would cross the valley, find a village and regain their strength there. Angelica calmed down and asked, while they were resting, who would be on guard. She turned to Reed and asked, because thanks to someone, that guy is not with them, right? He clicked his tongue in displeasure and said that all right, he will keep watch and they can rest. After that, everyone except him left. He hit the ground with his fist and wondered how this could happen. He did the right thing, right? At the same time, MC was walking down the street in the city. Satis walked next to him and said that it was very beautiful here. She had never walked around the city like this before. He looked at her with embarrassment and thought that she was very beautiful, as well as this city. She noticed that he was looking at her and asked if something was wrong. He was confused because of this, loudly denied it, and thought, this is reality, right? It feels like he is in a dream, so this is ordinary life? After that, they came to their room at the hotel. She apologized and said that there were no other rooms. He said that everything was fine. He would sleep on the floor and she could take the bed. She refused and said that she can't let him be on the floor because they rented a room together. He said that everything was fine. She doesn't even have to think about it. She has to sleep on the bed. She asked if he wanted to sleep on the ground, or was she missing something? Wouldn't it be better if they used the bed together? He was very surprised by this and asked what it meant. She said that it meant that they would lie down together and sleep on the bed. She created a magic circle and said that she would probably change her clothes. He loudly asked her to wait and asked if she was okay with that. She agreed and said that if it was him, then she was fine. She hit him on the forehead with her finger and said that, however, touching was forbidden. After that, he began to take off his clothes and thought that until that moment, he had lived as the adults told him. He worked as bait, guarded while everyone was resting, just so that he would not be scolded. He was used as a vanguard and then as a rearguard. He was tortured, interrogated, but he was able to withstand any difficulties and develop his skills. However, he still had no experience in such situations. The elders did not tell him about this. What should he do? It seemed to him that he should take the chance and escape through the window. Satis finished changing, came up to him and said that she apologized for keeping him waiting. Something was wrong. Why was he holding his head in the corner of the room? Shoto looked at her with embarrassment and thought that this was the first time he saw her so defenseless. She asked if he wanted to tell her something. Something like that. She looked beautiful. He blushed deeply from embarrassment and tried to say something. She came closer, took his head and asked if maybe he was shy. She laughed and said that it was so cute. He became even more embarrassed because of this, jumped away from her and thought, will he have to sleep in such conditions with her like this? Wait, this is impossible, right? He sat down on the floor and she sat with him back to back and said that it is clear. He does not even look in her direction. He was very embarrassed and said that he asks not to mock him. She touched his hand and asked. He said that he cannot touch, but did she forbid him to look at her? He blushed deeply and asked what adults do in such cases. Satis said that she can't even imagine. He should not worry. He will fall asleep without any problems today. After that, they lay down in bed. He looked at the ceiling and thought that this is generally impossible. If he looks at her lying next to him, he will definitely not be able to fall asleep. Besides, if he moved even a little, he would still touch her unintentionally. It was a war of attrition. He had to remain still, erase his presence, and let time pass. What was that sweet scent? She smelled like flowers. Satis opened her eyes and asked, didn't she tell him he would sleep peacefully? He should relax now. It was okay. Nothing would harm him here, so he could rest. Later, when he had fallen asleep, she said that, to be honest, he was such a restless boy. She had to use some magic, but she was glad it worked. She thought that even if it was just for a moment, he should sleep peacefully. After some time, he woke up in the morning and thought that he had woken up much later than usual. He remembered what had happened yesterday and thought that it couldn't be. Did it really happen? He grabbed his head, hit the floor, and she asked, what was he even doing? He raised his head, and she asked, after such a peaceful sleep, he must be hungry. They should go have breakfast. He was about to say something with embarrassment, and she asked with concern, does he still feel sick? She touched her forehead to his and said that although it doesn't look like he has a cold. The protagonist cried out loud in surprise and said that he is fine. He will be ready in a couple of seconds, so he asks to wait a little. He started to get dressed and thought that his hands were shaking so much that he can't get ready properly. Usually it takes 30 seconds to get ready. Also, for some reason he feels pain in his chest. What the hell is happening to him? This has never happened before. They came to the tavern. They brought him dishes, and he thought that he can't believe that there is so much food for breakfast in front of him. It seems like a dream. He looked at Satis, who was eating with him at the same table, and thought that he can't help but look at her. She looked at him and asked, is something wrong? He has been looking around for so long. He was about to eat and said that it was nothing special. He was the same as always. She looked at his face and said that he had sauce near his mouth. She wiped it and asked, "Here, does he see? Being a bad boy who looks at a woman? Is that fair?" MC blushed really badly because of this and thought that he had never been treated so well before. He tried to drink water with trembling hands and thought that he should think about something else and become calm again. He would go crazy and die. He called her and asked why don't they go separate ways today. He would really like to see the sights of this city. She thought about it and asked if he also didn't want her to go with him. He didn't even think about enjoying the beauty of this city together. He thought with a surprised look that there was no point. He was not a match for her. She tried to hold back her laughter but couldn't help herself, asking for forgiveness and saying that it seemed like it was too much for him. Okay, then he can go wherever he wants. He calmed down and asked with a little surprise if she didn't mind. She winked at him, agreed, and said that she would also like to visit a few places. So at least once he should have fun like a normal boy. However, she asks that he promise her one thing. After that, he walked down the street and thought that although he had suggested it without thinking. Also, this was his first time walking around the city alone like this. Ever since the day he met Satis, he had experienced so many new things. He bumped into someone, apologized, and asked if he was okay. The man in front of him loudly said that he should watch where he was going. Wait, this guy? Shoto looked at him and asked with surprise, "Is it him, Holmes?" A little earlier, when they were sitting on the street, she asked, did he understand everything? He should try to avoid fighting, and he also needed to refrain from using his magic sword. He asked why he should hold back. She said that magic swords were more powerful than ordinary weapons. No one would ever imagine that a child like him could handle a sword, right? If these people, who were used to their peaceful life, saw a child using a magic sword, they would consider him a monster. Besides, there was a risk that he would have to use his power again for war. Now that he finally had a peaceful life, he didn't want everything to go back to the past, right? He agreed and said that he understood everything and made a promise. But now, Holmes, looking happy, said that he didn't expect to meet him here. It seemed like fate. Is he not with that beautiful girl today? The protagonist, looking confused, tried to say something, and he said that it seemed there were things that were better left unsaid. He also had some free time, so they could take a walk. They were walking down the street together and he asked what his job was. He turned to him and asked if he knew that monster body parts were used to make items like mechanisms and weapons. Captured monsters were sent to the city, and artisans collected materials from them. The severed parts retained their magical power and were sent to another city to be processed into items. They, the mercenaries, were supposed to escort them to the next city. He said with surprise that he had heard of such artisans. He was about to say something else, and Holmes said that he could watch them work. It was free. Also, this would be a great place for his date with that beautiful girl. Don't you think? MC was very embarrassed by this, loudly refused and said that he was wrong. They were not one of those. He said with a smirk that he knew that. She was like the girl next door who had been looking after him for a long time. But now he sees her as a girl, right? He noticed his embarrassment, began to pat him on the back and said that there was nothing to be ashamed of. Of course, seeing all her beauty, he became more gentle, such is the nature of men. He noticed a large shadow, looked up and wondered what it was. He saw the huge body of a monster being carried on a cart. He thought with a shocked expression that it was huge, like a huge boulder. Holmes turned to him and said that this was a rare kind of dragon. Whoever caught it should be praised. Shoto looked around in surprise, and he called him and asked what was wrong. He walked up to him, patted his head, and told him that he should relax, because this monster was already dead. He tried to remove his hand and thought that Satis had not fully recovered yet. Perhaps she still had a fear of monsters. What would happen if she saw this creature? This monster opened his eyes, and he said that it was time for him to leave. He would find his way back, right? He agreed and said that he would be fine. By the way, he remembered that he hadn't told him his name yet. He said that there was no need for that. He started to leave, waved his hand and said that he would just call him Guy. He didn't want to force himself to remember names. He also said goodbye to him, after which he quickly started to leave and wondered why he was worried about her now. Did she know that there was a monster in the city? He was brought here at the worst possible moment, and he had a bad feeling about this. He came to a street where many worried people were running away and loudly said that this was terrible. He had to get away from here. The protagonist asked in a worried tone, "What happened here?" A man with a frightened face said loudly that a monster was rampaging in the square. He looked at this monster in surprise and thought that he had thought so. He was going to get the magic sword and thought that he shouldn't get it. If he did, he would break the promise he made to Satis. There were too many people here. Even if he managed to kill the monster, if he used the magic sword, it would cause problems not only for him, but for her too. The man said loudly that he had told him to run away from here. He asked him to wait and loudly asked if he had seen a girl here. She wore glasses and black clothes. The man grabbed him by the shoulders and loudly said that this was not the right time to ask about such things. Another man approached them and said that he saw her. She was incredibly beautiful. He remembered it seemed she was going to the square. He thought that this meant that she was somewhere nearby. He did not want to break his promise, but he would definitely save her. He began to look around and thought that perhaps he could use something else, something with which he would not stand out. A little earlier, Satis walked down the street and thought about the situation in neighboring states, monster activity, victims. She managed to gather the information she needed. Her attention was caught by the fact that someone said that this was a show with the collection of resources of a very rare monster. She looked at it and thought that they were collecting resources from dead monsters, extracting the materials they needed. The old her would not have felt anything when she saw the dead body of a fellow creature, but now she felt simply terrible. She needed to get away from here quickly. Suddenly, someone on the street loudly asked, "Is he really still alive?" The monster stood up and walked towards her, and she thought that she needed to calm down. It was enough to concentrate her power and attack. She could easily deal with such a monster. However, she was experiencing that feeling again. She couldn't move. She had managed to run so far, but was she really destined to die? Next to him, she was able to forget about the horrors of the past and see a wonderful dream. For the first time, she thought that it was wonderful that she was here. She began to cry with a small smile and thought that they had spent so little time together, but she was grateful. She apologized for leaving him alone again. She fell to her knees, closed her eyes, began to remember the time spent with him, and thought that she would so like to live together with him. She heard something, raised her head and called MC by name. The masked man turned to her and said that he didn't understand at all who she was talking about. He was just a monkey passing by. The villagers looked at him and asked, "Who is this guy? Did he call himself a monkey?" The monster quickly ran towards him, made a loud sound, and tried to attack him with its paw. He dodged the blow, but the monster suddenly turned around and attacked with its tail. He survived the attack, ran along the tail, and struck the monster on the head. He screamed loudly in pain, and the people loudly said that it looked like this guy in the monkey mask was defeating the beast. They began to praise him, and she, with a worried look, thought that he wouldn't last that long. He attacks with incredible speed. However, he uses a regular sword, not a magic one. It will break very soon. If only he could somehow deal a crushing blow. The monster slammed its paw onto the ground, causing bricks to fly in all directions. She was scared when she noticed a brick was flying at her, but he managed to get in front of her so that she wouldn't get hurt. Because of this, his mask cracked, blood flowed, and he said that he will deal with this monster. She should hurry and run. Satis squeezed her hand tightly and thought that it was happening again. She would always be the one who needed someone's protection again. He was fighting to the death, trying to keep his promise. She would never let him protect her forever. She fired several magic projectiles that exploded on the monster's body. Shoto was surprised by this, and she called him a monkey and said that she would cover him. She continued attacking with magic. Because of this, dust rose up and people loudly asked, "Did they kill him?" Because of the dust, they can't see anything. She deliberately attacked in a way to raise more dust and thought that this was his chance. He should use his magic sword. He smiled because of this and threw away the sword and dagger that he had. He quickly pulled out his sword from subspace and killed it with one incredibly fast strike. When the dust cleared, the surprised people loudly said that this little guy did it. He won. Where is their hero? That girl is incredible too. They looked around and noticed that they were gone. She ran into their room. He was sitting on the bed and said that she returned just in time. He heard something happened in the southern part of the city. Is she okay? Satis happily agreed and said that it was all thanks to his intervention. He asked what she was talking about. He had only recently returned here. She sat down next to him, laughed and asked, was it true? Maybe she confused him with that monkey guy. The people outside created a commotion, trying to find the heroes who defeated that monster, although it seemed they would not find him anytime soon. In the end, he hid his true identity by covering himself with cloth and putting on a funny mask. She looked at his face, took his hand, and said that she was grateful that he kept his promise. Thanks to him, she was able to move forward too. He turned to her and said that he was glad to hear that. She said that it seemed like it was time for them to leave this city. He agreed and said that it was a good idea. She said that she suggested going to a village located in the north. There were landscapes waiting for them to enjoy. He said that it sounded like a plan. At the same time, that the Demon King asked loudly in a displeased tone, "They still haven't found Satis?" The demon called him his lord and said that he offered his deepest apologies. The worried demon thought that ever since she escaped from the Demon King's realm, their army had been constantly losing to the humans. He said loudly that this woman was definitely alive and hiding somewhere. They should bring her to him. The demon said that if they sent any more soldiers to search for her, their army would be at its limit. He said loudly that they should send Sebek to the battlefield. The demons were surprised by this and asked loudly, is he talking about that mercenary they recruited? He intends to send this former human, half-demon to the battlefield? He said that such a battle-obsessed person should be used to the fullest, although it irritates him that he has to use the power of a half-breed. After that, the demon came to him, loudly called his name and said that he had good news. This is a direct order from His Majesty, the Demon King. At least, he approved it. The man sitting on the bodies of the slain people turned around and asked with a smile, In other words, he should kill even more, right? After some time, the protagonist walked along the path and said that he hadn't strolled along the highway so serenely for a long time. Satis, walking alongside, agreed and said that the Demon King had begun to lose his grip lately. She looked at the map and said that they had already gone quite far from Clayshat. Judging by the map, they were approaching some village. He looked into the distance, called out to her in surprise, and said that she should go see if there was snow on the mountain peaks. She agreed and said that it seemed like there was a lot of it there, because the temperature in the mountains was much lower. If the war ended and peace came, they would be able to walk along other roads. He said that in that case, peace would come sooner. He noticed something ahead, called her and said that someone was lying there. Maybe it was an enemy? She, with a slightly confused look, said that she didn't think so. It was too weak a trick for an ambush. He came closer and wondered, is this a human girl? He said that she was still breathing. She should get it. At that moment, the girl grabbed his leg, asked for water and food, and said that she hadn't eaten anything for 3 days. He was surprised by this and asked if she was okay. She stood up, swung, and loudly asked for food. He dodged her hand and thought that she was fast. Her movements were clearly not those of a beginner. However, he could handle her. He grabbed her by the arm and pushed her to the ground. Her stomach growled, and she said she was hungry. They gave her water and food, and she said in a satisfied voice that they had helped her out. She apologized, but she lost her temper because she was hungry. He said it was okay. What's more important, she was a soldier. What was she doing here? She agreed and said her name was Kilim. She was sent to the village of Benjamin, but she got lost. By the way, who are they? They both introduced themselves, and Satis said that they were traveling together. She repeated their names in her mind with a thoughtful look and thought that she had heard it somewhere before. MC said that they were also going to this village. Maybe she would go with them? She was very happy to hear this, and she leaned towards him and quietly asked, is he sure? They could be exposed. He quietly said that everything would be fine. Whatever happened, he would think of something. Besides, he did not feel any danger from her. He looked at her, remembered Holmes, and thought that she looked like the guy he met in Clayshat. The character, of course, is completely different, but the similarity is still felt. After some time, they reached the village of Benjamin, and Kilim said in a joyful voice that they finally arrived. First of all, they need to greet the headman, and they too. They entered the headman's house. The woman noticed them and said, welcome to Benjamin. Her name is Scarlet. She is the village headman. Who are they? She joyfully pointed at them and said that they were her saviors. They gave their names, and Satis said that they were something like relatives. He was a little surprised by this, turned to her and quietly asked what she was talking about. She quietly said that she thought it would make the other person feel more at ease. She laughed and said that they seemed to get along well. A servant approached them. She called Kilim and said that she would bring her up to date. So, why did they come here? Satis said that they were just traveling. Can they stay here for a few days? Scarlet said that then they came at the right time. They just had a house available. She was surprised by what she heard and said loudly that a room would be enough for them. She said that it was okay. They could live there for a while. She was still amazed by this and said that, however, they were strangers. She calmly looked at the cup with her drink and said that almost the entire village population was like them. This is exactly what attracts different travelers to the village. It is like fairy tale magic. She is sure that their arrival here is also predetermined by fate. She offers to show them the house right away. A bird knocked on the window. She took the letter from it and said that it was an urgent message. A rather rare event. She read it and said that they only intended to stay for a few days, but it seemed they should linger here. Satis, looking worried, stood up and asked, has something happened? She clutched her head and said that the Demon King's army was advancing with renewed vigor. Surveillance would be strengthened in the nearby towns, borders and outposts would be closed. She needed to tell Kilim about this. Could they wait a little? She left the house. Shoto turned to her and asked, the demon army is advancing at such and such a moment. Does she know something? She said with a thoughtful expression that it was simply difficult to do in their situation. She had a hunch and said with a smile that they should follow the advice. She didn't want to hear about war when they managed to get to such a peaceful village. She thought that maybe it was because of that guy. They both looked alike. He was a former capital soldier who perfectly wielded a magic blade. At the same time, the wounded heroes fought against the demons, and Reed said loudly that the enemy ranks were thinning. They needed to finish right now. He was very exhausted and thought that they should hold out a little longer. Sebek came out to them and said that it turned out they were capable of something. The demons turned to him, called him a newbie, and said that he was late. They lost half of the warriors. Why are they taking so long? This guy completely disobeys orders. He looked at these demons from the side and wondered who this guy was. Maybe a half-breed? Had he used to be human? He pulled out a sword from subspace, and the demon said that now they would show them their true power. It was a warrior with a magic sword. Hudora was very surprised by what she saw and asked loudly, is this a magic sword? The rest of the group said that, however, they should not be among the ranks of demons. How low would one have to fall to join the demons, being a human? Sebek went to them and said that in battle, it does not matter whether he is a human or a demon. By becoming a demon, he will extend his life many times over. He just likes to kill his enemies. Reed was indignant about this and loudly said that among them there are only sick freaks. He will not turn a blind eye to this. He calmly looked at him and said that wars will never leave this world. Isn't this what they should tell their future generations? Hiding behind justice, they harbor hatred for the irrationality of this world. All that represents his justice is hatred. However, it is even better this way. People like him are necessary for wars to continue. However, it was time for him to get to work. He pointed his sword at them and asked if they could stand up to him, the wielder of a magical sword summoned by viper venom. Reed looked at him with a slightly tense expression and wondered, who was this guy? His aura immediately changed. A kite flew to him. He turned around and said with a disappointed look, "But now is such a good time." The bird landed on his shoulder and said that he should return from the goblin squad. He should immediately go to the western and then to the eastern front and join the battle line. He was happy to hear this and said that it sounded interesting. He finally understood the Demon King. He put away his sword, started to walk away, and said that he was sorry, but he was leaving the squad. The goblin turned to him and loudly said that he should at least finish his job. He refused and said that they should handle such a simple job themselves. He called Goblock and said that he remained in charge. The goblin pointed his hand at the group of heroes and said loudly that they must teach these idiots a lesson. Reed looked at him and said that they must prepare. The monsters began throwing weapons and shooting bows at them. Hudora got injured. He called out to her loudly and said that she should not overdo it. They needed to retreat. In such a situation, they could handle it in an instant. He swung his sword very hard and released a wave of magic. She watched it with a joyful expression and thought that this was an all-out attack using magical power. Indeed, this is the power of the brave. The rest of the group said that she would use fire magic. They should follow her. She could rely on him. She looked at them and thought that they were right. The country was counting on them. They must definitely win, even at the cost of their lives. She stood in a fighting stance and said loudly that she was a warrior, and she knew it. After some time, with great difficulty, they defeated all the demons, and he said they held out well. He called Macron and was about to say something, but noticed that he was lying on the ground and not moving. After that, the three of them sat by the fire, and Angelica said that they should attack and restore. They shouldn't have said that at the same time. Reed asked, would she just open her mouth and not mourn the death of a comrade? She grabbed the hem of his clothes and loudly asked, what is he gonna do next? They ran out of food and water. He said loudly that he knew about it and was now thinking about it. Hudora sat to the side and wondered, why is all this happening? She thought their trip would be colorful and filled with adventures. However, in reality, it was a series of brutal battles. By the way, if you lived in battles all the time, she asked, what would Shoto do in moments like these? He grabbed her hand and asked loudly in a very dissatisfied voice, even she denies him? She probably despised that killer too. It was too late now. She was confused by this and asked, he was a fierce warrior, but he grew up in harsh conditions. So did he have any intelligence at all? He pushed her to the ground and loudly said that she was wrong. She always talked about morality and preached humanity, right? However, now she was contradicting morality. She called him with tears in her eyes and said that she asked him to calm down. He loudly said that he was calm enough. Angelique watched them from the side. An idea occurred to her, and an evil grin appeared on her face. She called her name and said that her martial arts were very significant, but for opponents of demons, this power is not enough. She understands this, right? Hudora looked at her and in a confused voice asked what she was saying. She leaned towards her with an evil grin and asked, right now, she's basically dead weight, right? Reed agreed, saying that she had great ambitions, but she lacked the necessary strength. How was she going to fight if she didn't even have a basic understanding of magic? Besides, the Demon King's representative class is even stronger, right? She's just a little stronger than an ordinary human. She started to feel uneasy about their words and wondered, like, she was here for the sake of others, right? If she were banished like him, she would become a disgrace to the clan. She asked them to wait, knelt down, and said that she would do anything, would listen to any command, and therefore begged them not to abandon her. A wide smile appeared on Angelica's face. She raised her head and said that then she would give her an order. She must find him and bring him back here. With this guy, they would not be afraid of any monsters. She was confused by this and said that, however, several days had passed since his banishment. She had no idea where he could be. She slapped her in the face and asked who gave her permission to respond. She herself said that she would listen to any command, right? Then she must find this maniac right now. Hudora held the place where she had hit and said that she understood. She needed to find him. Angelica looked at her with a smirk and said that after that she would make plenty of use of her. She went off to search alone, and she stretched and said that it was just the two of them left. However, contrary to expectations, it might be more comfortable than with a bunch of people. Reed agreed and said that he had become a little calmer. They should take a break and then continue on their way. She said that perhaps they were the best party in this composition. He said that he wished Macron were alive. However, he too was rather meager. Nothing could be done about it. Hudora walked through the dark forest, wiping away tears and thinking that they both had changed. but if he returned, maybe everything would return to normal. She calmed down and with a determined expression on her face thought that she would definitely bring him back. After some time, the protagonist fired his bow and killed a bird. He turned to the voice of a man named Ryoto, who praised him for doing so. He began to smoke and said that this should be enough for the catch. That's all he has to catch. At least he'll be able to eat it with rice. He thanked him and thought that this was the 5th day they'd been in this village. He and Satis help out in the village, like getting food and the like. After that, they came into the house, sat down at the table, and he said that he had a pretty good memory. He said that it wasn't true, he just explained things well. Ryoto said that, however, when he carried things, he should stop falling over and over again, dropping things. MC apologized, and he asked, he can handle a bow and arrow, traps, but why can't he do all the chores around the house? He said that he shouldn't look down on his clumsiness. If he wanted, even a wooden plate could be broken, as if it were porcelain. He was a little confused by this and asked loudly, was he just bragging? He asked, however, how could he meet him in such a place? Speaking of him, there's no one on the battlefield who doesn't know his name. Isn't he a legendary sniper? There are many children, including him, who admire him. He asked him to stop in a serious tone and said that he wasn't that good. He got up from the table and said that he was an assassin who took the lives of others while sneaking around in the shadows. He was about to object, but Ryoto turned to him and said that he should listen to him. In this village, there's a rule not to pry into other people's pasts. He patted him on the head and asked if he understood that. He agreed, then walked down the street and looked around. He saw a beautiful view of the village from above and sat down on the ground to admire it. He wondered how many more places like this were in the world. He would like to see it. Kilim was walking along the same path, noticed him and called out his name. He turned around, called out to her and asked if she was making her rounds. She came closer and asked if his help was finished for today. He agreed and said that, by the way, they also treated him to lunch. She sat down next to him and said that he was so nice. If she even just talked to Ryoto, she would only get the cold shoulder. However, she also wanted to get along with the hero. Shoto said that maybe he just didn't know how to make noise. She was surprised by his words and loudly asked what he meant. She looked into the distance and said that maybe that man was the same. He asked with a puzzled look what she meant. She said that there was a man she fell in love with, but he ran away. However, she had done so much for him. She gave him money for rice, gambling, and much more. However, he said that it was all resourcefulness, and despite the fact that he worked as hard as he could, he was a freak. That's why, when her savings ran out and she borrowed some money during her marriage, she was abandoned in this village. He was a little confused by this story and thought that it looked like they were both losers. She calmed down and said that, nevertheless, he was an excellent mercenary soldier. At that time, he was the head of the troops, and she fell in love with him. He said that he would like to meet the man whose skill she recognized. She said loudly with enthusiasm that he was a good guy, the man of her destiny, Holmes. He was surprised by what he heard and wondered what this man even did. No wonder they both looked alike. She stretched and said that it was a little nice to hear. She stood up, was about to leave, and waved goodbye to him. The protagonist also said goodbye to her and thought that this village was a little strange, where people with certain life circumstances were dragged. The rumors could be true. After that, he returned to his house and Satis asked how he liked it. He ate a pie and said with surprise that it was delicious. She was glad to hear this and said that Miss Scarlet had taught her this. The pie using local fruits was truly exquisite. In her opinion, it was tastier than any restaurant pie. He thought that it seemed like she really liked fruit. She called him by name and said that he had been working hard all the time, so she suggested taking the next day off. He asked what they should do that day. She said that she was going to go on a picnic. There was a beautiful view from the hills on the outskirts of the village. She suggested eating the rest of the pie there. He didn't understand this, and she asked if he knew what that was. It was, for example, a walk in the mountains or some kind of excursion. Usually they enjoy relaxing there while admiring the scenery. Now he understood what it meant and agreed to it. He could wake up a little later, otherwise he always got up too early. He said with a slightly confused look that it was because he always went to work with Ryoto, but he still got up a little late. She asked if he could pour them some tea, but in a way that wouldn't drop or spill anything. He said with an enthusiastic expression that she could rely on him. He didn't think everything would be like the first day. She said that for some reason she was really worried. After that, they were sitting on the couch, and MC said that this was a great luxury compared to the time when he drank only water. Satis was sitting next to him and asked, "Isn't it wonderful? This is just a little luxury, and tomorrow there will be even more of it." He remembered their plans and said that he was looking forward to tomorrow. Later, she called him and said that the bath was ready. He could go first. He went into the bath, and she asked how she should thoroughly wash the bad boy who only takes quick baths. At the same time, he was sitting in the bath and said that he began to feel cleaner, and yet, This is an amazing place. There's also something here that she personally reconstructed with the help of complex magic. If we talk about the equipment, it is also not inferior to the Roman baths. He thought that all the adults he meets here have changed, but they are all good people. She also said that she liked the local fruit pie. It would probably be nice to stay here a little longer. She entered the bath and said that he has not washed himself properly yet. He turned sharply to her and, surprised, loudly called her name. She calmly walked further and asked, as expected, "The bath is beautiful, isn't it?" He was very embarrassed about this, called her loudly by name, and asked why she was here. She asked, hadn't they decided this before? He doesn't wash his body properly, right? That's why she came to teach him. He should sit down since now he will remember how to wash himself properly. After that, he sat down, she began to wash his hair, and he wondered if he would die today. That's right, he didn't know how to wash himself like that, and it was a bit unpleasant. She asked him not to move and said that she couldn't rinse him properly. He thought that, to be honest, it was the opposite. Or maybe he felt something. He was very embarrassed and asked, "Isn't that all?" She denied it and asked, "They haven't washed his body yet, right?" She looked at his back and thought that he had so many old scars. Not only sword wounds but also traces of torture. It doesn't go away. She said that he should wash the front side himself. After that, Satis began to wash herself. Shoto sat in the bathtub and thought that he needed to calm down. In any case, he can't look at her. However, how can he calm down? She also sat in the bathtub with her back to him and said that the water here is very good. Just like life was cleared out, wasn't it? He thought that it looked like something was going wrong. He ran to the exit, loudly apologized, and said that he was already finished. She was a little confused by this and said that apparently she was too assertive. He left the room and thought that he felt like he was going to die there. Maybe he should quickly change his clothes before she came out? He looked at the basket, noticed her clothes there, and clenched his hand into a fist. She heard a loud sound, ran out to him, and loudly asked what just happened. There was a bruise on his face. He turned around and said that everything was fine. She shouldn't worry. She was protected. She asked loudly in a puzzled tone what really happened. After that, he lay down on the sofa, put his hand on his head. Satis came out of the bathroom and asked if he was okay. Perhaps it was dizziness from a long bath. They drank some water and she asked if they should go to bed already. He agreed, and she asked if they would sleep together again. The protagonist ran into another room and loudly wished her good night. She thought with a thoughtful look that it seemed she had overdone it. However, she hoped that he would get used to it. He opened the door slightly, called her, and said that he was grateful to her for taking a bath together. He immediately left the room, and she was amused by this strange gratitude. They mentally wished each other good night and fell asleep in separate rooms. The next day, they went on a picnic together, and she said that what an amazing view it was. He agreed. They spread a cloth on the ground, and she said that she suggested they have lunch here. She took out different food from the basket. He looked at it in surprise and asked if she made all this. He began to eat quickly and said that it was delicious. There was so much meat. She laughed and said that the food won't run away. He said that this is a place where they can relax in nature, so spacious that he feels somehow tiny. She agreed and said that she saw various treasures of gold and silver, but even they are somehow small. He yawned and said that he also couldn't freely allow himself to enjoy the scenery, so he is glad that he could look at it with her. She noticed that he looked sleepy and asked if maybe he should rest for a while. She will wake him up in a while. MC rested his head on her legs and said that for some reason he feels nostalgic. Satis asked, is he talking about this place? Perhaps his ancestors came here. The memory of creatures carved a long time ago. Maybe this scene of great nature is imprinted in it. Why is it that here, in a place that he has never visited and never seen, he feels nostalgic? It is truly mysterious. He fell asleep, and she stroked his head and looked at the landscape. After some time, he woke up and she asked if he slept well. He agreed, thanked her, looked into the distance, and thought that however, it was still a quiet place, even if you look at it again. He ran somewhere and said that he would take a little walk around the neighborhood. She started to collect things and said that since so, she would go too. He fell somewhere, and she turned to him and wanted to ask him to wait for her. She was very worried about this, called him loudly and asked where he was. He called her. She ran to the hole in the floor and asked loudly, is he injured? He was standing in a dark underground corridor and said that she should not worry. He was okay. More importantly, could she come down here? There is some kind of strange place here. She carefully went down to him, illuminated this place with magic, and asked, are these ruins? It seemed to stretch all the way to the end. They walked down a corridor filled with totems, and he said it was strange that it was all standing in that position. She said that totems were statues made to worship ancestors and spirits. She had heard somewhere that the tribes living on this land created such things. However, as far as she knew, totems should have a face. They were very old, completely different from the ones she had seen before. The material also looked more like mineral than wood. Perhaps this is what the first totems looked like? She wondered. Their original meaning was measurement and cause and effect, so that's what it was for? They reached the end of the corridor, saw a spacious room, and he asked, was this an altar? Satis had a hunch she was about to ask something, and Shoto asked asked, did she know anything about this? She turned to him and said that it was connected with a story about monsters. Hundreds of years ago, demons were divided into many categories. However, they all united with the Demon King, becoming his single army. However, one category did not obey the king. These are Wendigos. They are believed to be spirits that live only by the will of nature. He asked, then, is this place the altar of the Wendigo generation? She said that it must be so. They are said to have existed in this world since the very creation. Now she understood. This is the land where the Wendigos dwell. He called her and said that it seemed like she had seen a lot of interesting things. Maybe they should go back? He called her, but she loudly refused and said that this was such an amazing and valuable heritage. She can't just leave. He agreed, sat on the threshold, watched as she looked around with interest, and thought that it was a rarity to see her like this. Usually she was so lively when she did something with him. He turned away from her and thought that he should calm down. He noticed something behind the altar, went there and wondered if there was something there. There he saw a drawing of a creature in a robe with many tentacles and looked at it in surprise. Satis called him loudly. He turned around and she said that she called him so many times and he did not react at all. He apologized and said that he was just distracted. She looked where he pointed and said with bewilderment that there was nothing there. After some time, the protagonist told Ryudo about this, and he said that this place is an altar where Wendigos were worshipped in the past. He was inspired by what he heard and thought that he knew it. He said that he should go to a man named Genda. He is a strange guy living in the western part of the village. He is a priest of the Yella tribe, which used to be located here. Perhaps he can find out something from him. Later, he came to the house next to which there were totems and asked if he had come to the right place. This house looked strange. He was going to knock on the door, but the resident of this house opened the door and said that the guy who brings destruction and storm, he knew that he would come. Everything in this world depends on dimensions and cause and effect. He can enter inside. MC was shocked by this and wondered why he knew. This is Genda. He entered his house and said that he would pour him tea brewed according to his grandfather's recipe. It instantly relaxes and cleanses the soul. After that, they sat down at the table and he asked, so he saw the unchanging totem pole? This is a sign of imminent death. Most likely it was the death altar of the Wendigo Hospital. For them, Yella, he means the whole world. He has existed since the creation of the world. He created every living being with the help of his body. Everything that makes up their world in general, the sky, the earth, the sea, the mountains, the rivers, the fish, the birds, the people, he created all of it. They say it took tens of thousands of years to create all of this. He sipped his tea, listened carefully, and wondered what kind of wonderful story this was. Maybe it was a myth? Genda said that, however, in the end, one must repay and return one's life to him. The Yella do not fear death. Their bodies return to the soil and give new life and food for others. However, those who waste their lives in vain will suffer the wrath of Hospital. Shoto asked, so was that thing in yellow robes and with shoots that they saw at the altar him? He was shocked by what he heard, dropped his cup, and asked loudly, had he seen him? He said that his companion had not seen it. Maybe he was simply mistaken. He denied it and said that he was not mistaken. His statue had long since disappeared, but he had seen it as a child. He had never heard of anyone outside the Yella tribe seeing a Hospital. He seemed special. He was confused by this information and wondered why he saw him. After all, he had taken so many lives to live his own. Was he angry at him because of this? He asked in a worried tone if maybe he was stalking him. Genda denied it and said that he would definitely not appear in front of someone who was living a useless life. Maybe he was just testing him. They both thought about it, and he had an idea and said that he had such good eyes. He seemed to have been through a lot. He said that if you think about it, he was almost always on the verge of death, so it was a bit late to test him now. He said that it was very interesting. He would give him some advice. Very soon, an uninvited guest would come to him. It was a terribly emaciated woman with crazy eyes wandering the earth like a ghost. He said he would be careful. After that, he left his house. Genda looked at him and wondered if he was really the one bringing destruction and storm. He looked like an ordinary soldier, although maybe he was hiding the hardships he had been through. So he saw him after some time. On a dark night, Hudora walked with difficulty through the forest, and with a crazy expression on her face, loudly called the protagonist's name. At the same time, he was lying in bed, unable to sleep, thinking about the new information, and thought that the woman with crazy eyes was an uninvited guest. Who was she going to? Satis or him? Now that he had been kicked out, there were no acquaintances left at all. He got out of bed and asked if maybe he should take a little walk. He went out into a clearing, looked at the sky and thought that the moon was so beautiful. He walked a little and thought that it seemed like now he could sleep. Isn't it time to go back to his room? He heard some sound, turned around abruptly, and saw her walking towards him. She looked at him with a smile and said that they tried so hard for the sake of peace. However, she still didn't feel too comfortable in this village. He saw her with a surprised expression, called out loudly and asked how she ended up here. She said that it was quite easy to get information. He and the girl came to this village. However, they were still far from their goal. Weren't they encountered demons and villagers? He looked at her and thought that she was so battered, definitely not like before. She extended her hand to him and said that they should go. Now she needed his strength. He likes to kill and watch the enemy's blood flow along the weapon, right? Will he be able to kill even more people? MC lowered his weapon, apologized and said that he was no longer a soldier and was not going to fight anymore. She was shocked by what she heard, went towards him, and he apologized for ruining her plans. He wanted to live in peace. Hudora punched him hard in the face and asked loudly, does he know how hard it was for her to get here? He better listen to what his elders tell him. He must go with her now. He refused again. She grabbed her sword and said that however, if he did not go with her, she would kill him. She raised the sword over her head, about to attack him. But Satis grabbed the blade of her sword with her hand and asked in a serious tone, what was she doing? She turned to her with a surprised expression and said loudly that it was her. She remembered that the girl was with him and asked loudly, was it she who lied to him, wasn't it? She called her by name and position, but she ignored it and said that she had to answer the question. She broke the blade of the sword with one hand and asked, children should obey their elders, right? She was shocked by what happened and thought that she was a monster. Hudora jumped aside and she called him and said that she was asking to be allowed to hit her. He wanted to object, but she understood him, took off her glasses and said that everything would be fine now. She was no longer the one she once knew. She got into a fighting stance and said that she was not crazy. She would show her something good. She took out a pill and said that she got this thing from the bandit leader. This attracted Satis's attention. At that moment she ate it and screamed loudly. A strong energy engulfed her body and her face became crazier. She looked at it and said that this was a magic medicine that temporarily increases strength. Does she seriously think she can win like this? She laughed and said that at least she will fight longer. She jumped towards her and began to attack with her foot. She asked loudly, did she subjugate him? She is a schemer who does everything for her own goal. She called her vile and she stopped defending herself, suddenly ran up to him and delivered a powerful punch to her stomach. This caused her to lose her balance, and Satis was about to swing her leg to hit her head, but stopped at the last moment. She said that people with rottenness should not enter society because there is no truth in their hearts. Hudora became angry at this and tried to kick her, but she blocked the blow with her own leg. Immediately after, she jumped back, quickly ran up to her, and struck her with her elbow. Shoto was very worried about this and loudly called her name. She stood firm after this powerful blow and said with a small smile that this time she even managed to surprise her. She stood in a fighting stance and said that as expected from the commander of the Demon King's army, she must be destroyed. Satis said she was no longer in the Demon King's army, just as he was no longer a soldier. She wouldn't understand if she told her now. She ran toward her, and with a serious expression, loudly said that she should rest. They ran up to each other and were about to attack each other. At that moment, Kilim ran up to them, screamed loudly, and attacked Hudora from behind. Satis was confused by what had happened, didn't have time to stop her attack, and kicked her in the face. She received severe injuries from their attacks. She drew her sword, pointed it at her, and loudly said that this madwoman, threatening the peace of the village, must stop. She stood next to her and said that it seemed she couldn't move anymore. The protagonist looked at them and thought that this is how Hudora's attack ended with the arrival of reinforcements. They hurried and decided to leave the village. In the afternoon, she came to Scarlet and said that she apologized for the inconvenience. That girl from the group of heroes, she came for him. She put a cup of tea on the table and asked, so she is not human, but now communicates with people? She was a little surprised by this and asked how she found out. She said in a calm tone that everyone in the village understood this. She got up from the table, slammed her hands on the table, and said in a surprised tone that she could not believe that she really decided to leave them. Had they already completely relaxed in this village? She touched her hand and said that she told you, people here are fickle. This is a port for people who wander for all sorts of reasons. She will leave a home for her. She can always come back. Satis was surprised by this and thought that somewhere deep down she looked down on people as weak creatures, even after she met him. However, it turns out they were the ones looking after them. She started crying and thanking her. Scarlet said that she was offering to have a party together with all the villagers. She was confused by this and said that they can't accept, it would be too much. She said that it was fine. The villagers never refuse it. Hudora, injured from the previous battle, was lying in the next room and listening to their conversation. Sometime later, Satis was riding in a cart with MC. He was listing the meat and said that Ryuru shared so much with them. She agreed and said that it was really so. Apparently, he really liked it there. He agreed and said that they were so kind and welcomed them so warmly. She agreed and said that it was really a strange village. Still, they helped them a lot by agreeing to take them. Still, the next town was quite far away. The old man laughed and said that the war had calmed down and the borders had opened. Their journey was now in no danger. She smiled, but remembered what had happened earlier and thought that there had still been some difficulties. She said that she had heard that the Demon King's army's strength had also diminished. Most likely, it was the heroes' work, right? He turned to them and asked, don't they know? A group of heroes had gone missing. He was very surprised by this and asked, what did he say? The old man said that this rumor had spread quite quickly among travelers. They were last seen by a large lake in a certain city. He thought it was near the place where he was exiled. He said that in fact he would tell them in secret. They, among the merchants, have their own rumors. There have been more and more attacks on caravans here lately. Satis said that this couldn't be true. He doesn't want to say that the missing heroes did it, does he? He laughed and said that it was still just a rumor. Mount Reed, they say, is a noble man. One way or another, to disappear without a single word. He hopes he's okay. He suggests ending the sad stories on that note. Would they like to stop for a break and eat something? She used magic to get food and said that since that was the case, they were offering them some of their food too. He was surprised by this and said that he thought they didn't have any things. It's amazing. You can probably carry anything you want with you. She said that wasn't quite true. After that, they stopped for a rest. Shoto thought that the heroes had gone missing. Reed, the man who nobly saved people's lives, and the one who called his fighting method cruel, would never rob people. Hudora had also changed. He was sure that something had happened. This doesn't mean that he can't do anything except kill, or that he doesn't care, or that he's not worthy of anything else. He realized this when he talked to her. He realized that he's not just a soldier and wants to live like a human next to Satis. Later, he was walking to the cart, but he heard a sound that caught his attention and turned around. He saw a hospital, was surprised by this and thought that this couldn't be. He reached for the dagger and wondered why he appeared at this moment. He was confused because he passed by and wondered why he even came here. She noticed his strange behavior and asked if something had happened to him. He denied it and thought that it seemed like no one but him could see. He noticed the letter in his hand, and she said that he should hurry. They were already leaving. He hid the letter and said that he was already on his way. What city were they going to now? She turned to him and said that it was called Ulain Dona, or as humans call it, the Adventurer's Kitchen. At the same time, the goblins were on the battlefield. Goblok called Sebek and asked how he was feeling. He called him by name and said that he saw that he was still alive. He asked what about the Orc King? Was His Highness alright? He thought about it, began to remember and said that the long-awaited reinforcements had arrived. However, who would have thought that he would just leave the entire rearguard behind, abandoning absolutely everyone, and run away? What a weakling he was. He was a little indignant about this, and said that it was too much. He asked with a smirk, did he really think so? In any case, the rearguard was defeated. Well, such an army would not satisfy him. He looked at him and thought that when they arrived, the Orc King's army was on the verge of defeat. However, this guy put up a fight of 1 against 1,000, and was able to completely suppress the rearguard. He is such a fearsome character. Goblok said he would like to hear his opinion. Does the Demon King's army have a future? Due to prolonged defeats, the discipline and morale of the troops has plummeted. Subordinates who fail to cope with their tasks are secretly removed. At this rate, the army will collapse from within. It all started after the expulsion of Captain Satis. Sebek asked, isn't this an order from the Demon King? Then is there anything to worry about? He said loudly. However, orders shouldn't disgrace warriors like that. This is not what a king should do. The captain has done enough. He was about to ask something, but he pointed a finger at his face and said that then he should go and say it to his face. He should tell this stupid king what he's doing wrong. He was confused by this, and he turned around and said that nothing would change anyway. They should go to the next battlefield, right? Goblok lowered his head and said that he only thinks about battles. Sebek turned to him and said with a smile that he wants to find the best opponent, fight him and kill him. However, at the same time, he wants to be killed by this best opponent. He is sure that somewhere in this world there must be such a one. He was surprised by this and said how strange he was. He looked at him and said that he was the same. He thought that all the authorities, the elders, including the Demon King, do not notice that their fall is getting closer. He is the only one who can save their army of the Demon King. There is no one stronger than him, so he cannot die. Sebek remembered something and asked, did the Demon King give instructions on where to go next? He agreed, handed him a note, and said that this is the place where the Wendigo spirits live. He must destroy it as a warning. That's the order. He looked at the note and said that this is great. He knows this place. It seems to be the Adventurer's Kitchen, right? He feels that a wonderful meeting awaits him. At the same time, Satis called the protagonist by name to wake him up and said that they were almost there. She opened the curtain and said that he should look at it. He closed his eyes because of the bright light, came closer and saw a view of a very large city. She was standing next to him and said that this was the city of Ulain Donna. He called her loudly with great surprise and said that there is a sea there. She agreed and asked if this was his first time seeing the sea. He agreed and said that he heard that it was big. It was so cool. You can catch a lot of different fish there, right? It turns out that you can eat them, right? She looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked what he meant. He said that he had heard a rumor and wanted to confirm it. It was about sushi. Originally a foreign dish, but due to its taste and exoticism, it began to appear on the menus of restaurants in many different countries. Eating raw fish placed on rice, he doesn't understand the meaning of this dish at all. She said that she had heard about it too, but hadn't eaten it, so she couldn't say. Maybe then they could find a place to stay for the night when they arrived, and then go out into the city and look for a place where they could eat this sushi. He agreed and said that they could also see the city. There was sure to be something interesting there. After some time, they reached the city, found a restaurant, and he asked if this wasn't what they were looking for. She said with surprise that even the decoration was in a foreign style. She didn't expect that. He agreed and asked, however, it seems like it's somehow tasteless. They entered this restaurant, and the chef loudly said, "Welcome." They sat down in front of the counter, and he asked the dear customers if he should roll it or grab it. The waitress came up to them, apologized for him, and said that by grab he meant make them sashimi. In simple terms, it's raw fish cut into strips so that it can be easily picked up and eaten. They don't have to be shy. They ordered their dishes, and after that the waitress brought it to them. She said with a friendly look that sashimi is eaten with chopsticks, and sushi can be picked up with your hands. MC took the chopsticks in his hand and thought, so he needs to squeeze this strip with these wooden chopsticks. He took the sashimi with chopsticks, and together with Satis, they tried their dishes. They were very surprised by this, and said that it was quite tasty. She agreed, and said that now she wants to try sushi. She dipped the sushi in the sauce, ate it, and was very surprised by the taste. She thought it was the unique flavor of fish and rice with a vinegar filling that added its own charming aroma to this dish. There was also this barely perceptible sweet bitterness and spiciness of soy vinegar, mixing in the mouth and creating at the same time an unusual but amazing taste. They simultaneously said with happy faces that this was real sushi. The chef was glad to hear their satisfied comments, and they asked for more. The waitress heard the sound of the door opening, greeted the visitors, and said that at the moment they had no free seats, so she asked them to wait outside. One of the four guys, who looked like bandits, asked, so she means that after seeing them, she tells them there are no free seats. After all, he was so impatiently coming here to try this famous sushi. She began to get nervous, apologized, and was about to say something about seats. He kicked something hard and asked loudly in a dissatisfied tone, she should kick someone out then, or is she stupid? The customers became worried about what was happening, and Shoto looked at them silently. The cook was indignant about this and said that they shouldn't be causing a ruckus here. He would call the guards right away. The bandit approached him with a smirk and asked, "This is a weak threat. Besides, what will these guards do to him? Does this blade mean something to him?" His comrade came up to him, pointed to the side, and said that he should look at it. He looked at Satis, laughed, and said that she was quite beautiful. Wouldn't she like to have fun with them? He forgot to remind her. There was no point in resisting. Has she ever heard of magic swords? The bandit noticed that he was sitting next to her and glaring at him. He was very scared because of this and asked what was wrong with his eyes. He licked the blade of his dagger and said that he simply hated vile and disobedient freaks like him. Did he know how such people ended up when he punished them? He swung his dagger at him, and the protagonist grabbed a hot drink and splashed it in his face. He screamed loudly because of this, and he grabbed his arm, threw him to the ground, and put the dagger to his throat. He looked at his comrades, loudly called them idiots, and said that they should kill them already and save him. The bandit took out his dagger, pointed it at Satis, and loudly said that if he moved even once more, he would kill her. He must let him go before she lost her head. She sat calmly in the same place and said that it was better for him not to move. He was very surprised when he noticed that she bent the blade of his weapon and was distracted because of it. She took advantage of this moment, hit him with her fist, and asked if they should calm down. The other two bandits were scared by what happened and ran out of the restaurant. They noticed the guards standing in front of them, and he asked what kind of faces they were making. Did they like his magical armor? He is the commander of the city guard and a man named Osiris. He struck a heroic pose and said that he is also a man who can use the most powerful type of swords in the world, magical swords. In the name of justice, he will arrest them here and now. They have the right to remain silent. They drew their weapons and said that it looks like they are in trouble. He can try to do it if he can. He quickly defeated them both and said that no one has ever managed to escape from his sword. They, delinquents, should not have come to this beautiful city. Besides, they did this in his favorite place. Most likely, there are more of their allies inside. He went inside. MC noticed him and said that he came pretty quickly. He caught those bandits for him. Osiris looked at him in surprise and thought that it turns out there are people besides him who are gifted with the ability to use magic swords and who fight for the sake of justice. However, why is she here? This is Satis, the commander of the Demon King's army. After that, they came to his office, and he asked if he was sleeping. His precious restaurant was almost looted. However, the famous captain of the demon army defeated the bandits with a boy. This is somehow too strange. Don't they think so? They remained silent, and he looked at them and thought that it was indeed strange. The captain of the Demon King's army, he had watched her on the battlefield. But what about this guy? If she is the one he knows, she will try to gain the upper hand using all her skills of debate and flattery. However, she sits quietly and timidly, and what's even stranger is that all her attention is focused not on him, but on this guy. He needs to know who he is. He snapped his fingers and said that first they need to introduce themselves. They probably already know him. He is the light that pierces the sky. She became worried about this, and Shoto took her hand to calm her down and looked at her. He told him his name, and said that there was no point in hiding the fact that he is the owner of a magic sword. Osiris was surprised by what he heard and asked, is he storm and destruction? He had heard a lot about him. He has been using a magic sword since an early age and has defeated many powerful opponents with it. He is a legendary child warrior after all. He was very embarrassed by this and said loudly that it was just an exaggeration. He was an ordinary messenger. He laughed and said that he spoke surprisingly freely and he liked it. However, he cannot understand what is wrong with them. The captain of the Demon King's army and the legendary swordsman. It is a rather strange combination. Don't they think so? Could it have something to do with the situation in the world? Satis said that perhaps, as he already knew, she was in the demon army, but due to constant failures, she was forced to leave them. He was surprised by what he heard and asked, how could such a wise man be expelled? She said that while fleeing, she met him when he too was expelled from the team of heroes. She finished the story and he said that he understood everything. They are not feuding and wish for a quiet life, so they are two lovers on the run. She asked a little hesitantly, what is he going to do with them? Osiris remembered this and asked, what do they want? Satis said that she wanted him to simply forget about them. He said that of course he could, but unfortunately, he is completely subordinate to the organization. Of course, he also has authority. He thought about it. A smile appeared on his face and he said that they should come here tomorrow morning. They left the building and the guard asked why he let them go. Is there really no benefit in arresting them? He laughed and said that was not true at all. He would know when they arrived. The guard still doubted, was about to say something, but he said that he should stop. They would observe first. That was the plan tomorrow. He was a little surprised by this and asked, it seemed like the captain was having fun, right? He agreed and said that the owner of the magic sword was terrifying. As soon as he met them, he had a desire to know who was better. They should prepare the training ground. Tomorrow, he would duel him. At the same time, Reed was breathing heavily and wondered why this happened. He was holding his sword in his hands, covered in blood, and looked at something with a tired look. He stood in front of the murdered crew of one of the carriages, and Angelica opened the chest and said in a joyful tone that they were transporting real treasures. He wondered how many times this had happened already. Would a group that stood for ideals and righteousness do such a thing? Consign the blood of innocents to the moonlit ground and rob them? He couldn't stand it. His mind was clouded and he said that for sure there was nothing he could do. If only he could go back. They needed food and money to continue their journey. It was a necessity. She turned to him and asked if he should stop already. He should look here. There was so much food and goods here. They could eat as much as they wanted, buy new equipment, and most importantly, sleep on a soft bed. They should go to the city. They got into the carriage and drove off, and he said that he was definitely a hero. It was no mistake. He saw the skeletons of the people he had killed, and it made him vomit. She sat next to him and said that if he was going to be offended, he should be offended at himself. It was all because he was useless. He wiped his face and said that he was doing his best. It wasn't his fault. She asked, was he talking about it again? It seemed the legend of heroes had gotten to him too much. They don't plunder for the sake of heroism. He shouldn't blame her, because it was thanks to her that they were now riding in a cart. Besides, there was food and water here. She saw his tired expression, sighed, and said that nothing could be done. They should walk and talk. He agreed, and they walked through the forest together. They came to a cliff where Reed saw the moon and thought that the moonlight was so gentle and merciful to those whose hands were covered in blood. It cleared his mind. He turned around, called Angelique, and was about to say something. Unexpectedly for him, she pushed him off the cliff, and he was very surprised by what happened. He screamed loudly in fear, but managed to grab the edge with his hand. She started kicking him in the arm. He loudly asked her to wait and asked what she was doing. She asked without a drop of pity on her face. Doesn't he understand? She had enough of his incompetence. He should be dead already. He shouldn't worry. She will continue their path to defeating the Demon King even after his death. However, before that, she will go into town, have a tasty meal and take a bath, and then look for a partner again. She will create a real team of adventurers. He continued to hold on to the edge and said loudly that he will not allow her. She chuckled and said that even dead, he will not do anything to her. She will form a new team and kill the Demon King. Then her name will forever remain in history. Everyone will praise her. She started laughing loudly, and he thought that she was a real demon. He grabbed her leg and loudly said that she should go to hell. She was very surprised by this and loudly asked him to let her go. But he did not listen and threw her down. Angelica started screaming loudly as she fell from a great height. Reed climbed up, looked at his trembling hands and asked, did he just kill his partner? He began to remember everything he had done before, burst into tears and said loudly that he was not bad at all. He couldn't do anything. He had to kill her. It was self-defense exactly. He was not bad. He had a duty. He couldn't stop. He began to laugh loudly and said that he would not give up. He would overthrow the Demon King and save the world. At the same time, the protagonist got out of bed and looked at Satis, who was sleeping next to him. He went to the window and thought that this was the letter he received from a hospital on the way to the city. He opened the letter, saw a drawing of a crocodile and a snake, and read that the day after the full moon, a creature carrying death would appear. How can this be prevented? If he wants to become stronger, he must pass his test. He wondered what this was supposed to mean. The Wendigo of death learned something and wants to test it. The day after the full moon, there wasn't much time left. The next morning, they arrived at the right place and the guards led them inside. There, they met Osiris, who welcomed them to the training grounds. They walked further and saw that there were many people sitting in the stands. loudly cheering. She asked what was that, why did he bring them here? He called him by name and said that a very important matter would be decided, only between the two of them. It would be a duel with him, the storm, and destruction. MC became worried about this, asked them to wait, and said that he didn't want to kill him. He said with a calm smile that it would be a one-on-one battle. Killing was prohibited. One of them will simply admit defeat, or the referee will stop the duel himself if he deems it impossible or pointless to continue. However, he suggests setting a time limit. The fight will end in 5 minutes. She asked why he even wants to fight him. He said that he is the owner of a magic sword. He also owns one, so he is interested in which of them is stronger. Usually, it is a fight to the death, but given their situation, isn't it fair? She said loudly with a serious expression that this is selfish. Shoto stepped forward, which surprised Satis, and she wondered if he really wants to fight. Osiris looked at him and said that this is excellent. That is exactly the look one should have when challenged. He entered the arena and immediately drew his sword, and she sat in the stands with the guards. He said that these are the best soldiers he has ever trained, and they all specialize in regular, non-magical swords. He looked around and said that it was immediately noticeable how well trained they were. He summoned his magic sword and said that he proposed to forget about their relationship and origin for these 5 minutes. They must clash in combat, man to man. He looked at his weapon and said that his sword looked like a hidden weapon. Osiris said that it was head and shoulders above other magic swords. However, he should not be afraid since he slightly reduced its power. He assumed a fighting stance and said that they could fight since they both wielded magic swords. He pointed his sword at him and fired several magical beams. The protagonist dodged this attack and asked in surprise, "So this is a long-range sword?" He agreed and said that his sword specialized in firing laser beams. He looked at him with a smirk and said that now the real duel would begin. He began waving his arms and loudly declared that he was using the flight of fiery justice. He flew up, took out his weapon and flew towards him. The guards loudly said that the captain looked almost like a real meteor of justice in the sky. He looked at it with admiration, and Satis loudly asked why he froze. He didn't come to see a show now. His flying armor is complete nonsense. He's a common coward. He immediately calmed down and got into a defensive stance. Osiris began to attack him with lasers, and he repelled these attacks with quick strikes. As soon as he stopped attacking, he sharply swung his sword and released a magic wave. He easily dodged his attack and said with a smile that he was caught. He again pointed his weapon at him and began shooting beams while he ran away. He missed with this attack and said that even though he missed, he may not even think that he can hit him. He concentrated a lot of energy with which he was going to attack. Satis was very worried about this, called out to him loudly, and said that he should run from there. MC looked at this in surprise, but quickly pulled himself together, threw the sword aside, and it disappeared. Osiris noticed this and loudly asked what he was planning with his magic sword. He ran very quickly towards the stands and bounced off the wall, causing his shot to miss. He found himself level with him, summoned his sword, and threw it at him with a powerful kick in midair. He was very surprised by this, but was able to dodge this attack at the last moment. He began to fall down and wondered, was he bluffing? He changed the speed and angle of attack at the last moment. Shoto landed deftly on the arena, and he got to his feet, walked towards him, and said that the fight had just begun. He sighed calmly and with a serious expression on his face, got into a fighting stance. He raised his sword and asked if he knew of a technique. It was called Hato Jutsu and was used by foreign swordsmen. He looked at him with a satisfied smile and said that he would show it to him himself. They stood in the center of the square. The guard struck the gong, and a worried Satis looked on and wondered what he was even doing. He had to end this duel already. They stood in front of each other in silence for a few seconds. Osiris gripped the sword tighter in his hand, and they simultaneously ran towards each other. They ran very quickly towards each other, attacked simultaneously, and released a very powerful energy, causing a large cloud of dust to rise. The guard began to strike the gong and loudly declared that the duel was over. The guards, holding their breath, looked at the square, and she closed her eyes due to the intense tension. When the dust settled, they all saw that they were standing in front of each other, their weapons stopped in front of their faces. The protagonist looked at him with a joyful expression on his face and said that it seemed like a draw. Osiris twirled his weapon on his finger before putting it away, denying it and admitting defeat. Did he cut its beams with his sword because he calculated the trajectory of its attacks? He also put away his sword and said that he saw through it rather than calculated. The laser beams come straight from the blade, so he simply saw their direction. He asked in a surprised tone, was he able to see everything in one instant? It was amazing. He extended his hand to him and they shook hands. Satis came down to them, called him loudly and asked how he was feeling. Was he hurt? She was very worried. He laughed, apologized and said that everything was fine. They were already finished. The guards surrounded their captain, called him and asked if he was okay. They were upset about what happened, but Osiris asked in a calm tone, what was wrong with them? They shouldn't be so upset. Who do they even think he is? He's the captain, the light that pierces the darkness. She looked at him with a confused look and said that she would never be able to understand him. MC, looking satisfied, said that he thought he was cool. He wanted to be like him. She asked him to stop, and he looked at him and thought that, however, now they could finally discuss everything. Ulain, whom everyone called Osiris, exclaimed as he sipped his tea. That was a glorious battle. He hadn't fought like that in a long time. The protagonist asked him where he bought the flying armor. The boy replied that it wasn't for sale. The magicians made this custom clothing for him. This armor complemented his strength and satisfied his sense of justice. The protagonist wanted to say something to Satis, but the girl categorically declared, "He wants the same armor? No way," MC spoke. But he didn't even say anything. The girl added that she didn't have the power to waste it on creating such armor. Ulain, watching their exchange, thought with a smile, they look like brother and sister. He turned to Shoto and asked him, he came to talk, right? Let him tell him what he wanted. The protagonist answered, yes, exactly. He was interested in what the demons were doing now. He didn't mention that he was interested in Ahas Patel's letter. If he learns more about the demons, he can avoid unnecessary battles. The protagonist told the boy out loud he already knows the situation they're in. He and Satis are together, but if a demon or anyone else gets in here, it won't be good. Ulain replied that he understood. They're worried, but he can't reveal military information to tourists. MC was about to object, but the boy exclaimed, don't worry. This could be a reward for a fair fight. He'll tell them everything. The boy revealed a map of the military operations, and based on it, told them that the Demon Lord's army is currently gaining momentum and repelling its opponents. It will be very difficult for the humans to turn the tide. Ulain looked at Satis, pointed his finger at her, and continued that ever since she left his army, command has been weakened. The girl was surprised. She? The army already has overwhelming force without her. But even so, they're losing ground? Ulain said. They're all suffering defeat one after another in various countries. If this continues, defeat will only be a matter of time. He thought he'd be called up for war too, but apparently he had no chance of seeing the battlefield. He added that none of the scouts had reported any demons yet, so his fears were unfounded. The protagonist and Satis replied that they understood that. The girl looked at the thoughtful Shoto and told him that the Demon Lord might have little patience, but he wasn't one to waste time. They were just visitors. They shouldn't worry about war. She thought she couldn't say for sure that she understood the Demon Lord's actions, but he shouldn't think about it either. The protagonist, meanwhile, was thinking that he simply wanted to be by her side every day. That was all he wanted. Ulain exclaimed, they're taking this so seriously. Let them be confident. He'll smash the Demon Lord's army to smithereens. Satis chuckled to herself, thinking, what confidence? He's definitely strong. No, Shoto is a strong wielder of a magic sword too, right? Ulain continued, no matter what, it's safe here. If any trouble arises in the city, they can count on him. As they parted, Ulain asked them if they were tourists. The city was teeming with tourists like them. Let them take their time and look around. Walking through the city, MC said, Ulain isn't a bad guy. Satis asked him, does he still think this guy is cool? The protagonist exclaimed, he definitely is. The girl sighed and told him that one day, he'll understand everything. After a while, she said they were almost at the top of the hill. From here, there was a good view of the mountains and the sea. The allies climbed to the observation deck. The protagonist exclaimed in admiration, wow, it's so nice here. This was his first time seeing a beautiful landscape from such a height. Satis solicitously pointed him to a bench and said the beauty wouldn't run away if he sat down for a minute. MC did as she asked, looked around, and was surprised to see only adults present. Satis looked at him and asked, what's wrong? Are you nervous? The protagonist sheepishly admitted that he was a little. She took his hand and told him not to worry. She thought he was an amazing person too. The protagonist felt a sudden rush of embarrassment, wondering if he was being too nervous. At that moment, the girls behind them were discussing, it can't be true. This girl is dating such a handsome guy. The guys standing nearby wondered where he found such a beauty. After a while, Satis said, it's getting hot even though it's much cooler in the room. She looked at him and continued, I wish they had an umbrella. He's all sweaty. The MC, whose fever wasn't caused by the heat, agreed with her that it was hot and asked her how she felt. The girl pointed to her skin and laughingly said she was so sweaty that beads of sweat were visible. He looked at the spot she pointed to and, even more embarrassed, jumped up. Shoto asked her for water. Satis, handing it to him, asked if he was that thirsty. Snatching the water bottle from her, the protagonist poured it over his head. Passers-by looked at him in surprise. Satis also jumped up and asked him anxiously if he was okay. He thought, what's going on? He always looked at her calmly. He thought he was tough, but it turned out he wasn't. Satis looked at him in bewilderment, and then an idea occurred to her. The girl suggested that after they ate, they go to the sea. The protagonist was surprised. To the sea? She asked him if he wanted to go fishing. The protagonist exclaimed happily, he really wanted to. The girl laughed and told him, that's great. After a snack, Shoto came to the sea alone. The protagonist thought happily, holding a fishing rod over his shoulder, how good it was that he could rent it. Satis told him not to wait for her, telling him that the reason for her lateness would be a secret. He cast his line into the sea and waited for a bite. He thought how good it was that they decided to come here. At that moment, Satis called out to him. He turned around and wanted to be glad that she had finally come, but he cut himself off mid-sentence when he saw her. The girl had arrived in a swimsuit. She apologized for the wait and added that since they were at the sea, she had come up with the idea of swimming. Satis danced closer to him, causing him to shiver again. Then she leaned toward him and suggested they enjoy this time. The protagonist felt a jolt of electricity. He despairingly wondered how he could possibly calm down here. The girl dove into the water and sank. Something sparkling caught her eye underwater. She surfaced, took a deep breath, and dove again. It was a beautiful shell. Satis surfaced, called out to MC, waved and said, "Fishing is great of course, but you need to swim too." The protagonist sheepishly declined her offer, telling her he couldn't swim. She looked at him in surprise, and he almost shouted that he didn't want to swim. She persisted and asked him why. He shouldn't worry. A protective spell had been cast on the area. The girl continued playfully. How could she allow other men to be in this place when she had prepared this bikini just for him? So, he just needs to stay calm. With these words, she looked at him playfully again and winked. Before he could react, she was next to him, pinning him with his back to her, and dragging him into the water. Along the way, she reminded him that touching was prohibited, he remembers, right? You can't do weird things, okay? The protagonist was indignant. Then, why was she touching him so much? The girl calmly answered him, but she was allowed to. Only naughty children disobey adults. Apparently, she would have to punish the naughty boy. She sat him on her lap, pressed him against her, and began tickling him. MC began to break free from her embrace, laughing and screaming. Then he exclaimed, "Okay, he gives in. Please, make her stop this." Satis smiled, stopped tickling him, and told him he was a good boy. She released him, and he pointed out that he didn't have any swimwear. She suggested he take off just his top, and that she would dry his bottoms with magic later. Shoto did as she instructed, took off his top, and, wearing only shorts, dove into the water. As he sank into the depths, he gazed in awe at the sea creatures and fish swimming past him. A little later, Satis joined him, taking his hand, and together they explored the seabed. They were happy and cheerful together, exchanging admiring glances at the beauty of the sea. After a while, the allies surfaced and headed to the shore, where the protagonist fell asleep in the hot sun. When he awoke, he saw Satis busily tinkering with something. The girl remarked, "Is he awake yet?" They had a good swim, and was he able to rest? MC rubbed his eyes, answered her affirmatively, then thanked her and asked if she was making anything. Satya told him yes. She showed him a necklace and asked if it was beautiful. Wasn't it? She was thinking of making a pendant out of the shell she picked up. He remarked admiringly. "A pendant? That's so cool. But anything would suit her." The girl said it wasn't for her, but for him. The protagonist was confused and exclaimed in surprise, "Him? Did accessories suit him?" She looked at him carefully and thought that while she liked the current Shoto, a fashionable one would be even more interesting. The girl asked him if it wasn't fun to take care of one's style. The protagonist replied, "Well, since she did it, why not wear it?" Satis asked him to turn his back to her. When he did, the girl placed the jewelry around his neck and carefully fastened it. After that, Satis declared, "Done." She looked at him and remarked that, in her opinion, it suited him very well. MC squeezed the shell with his hand and thanked her for such a gift, adding that he would definitely take care of it. Satis looked at him with a slight sadness in her eyes and thought, he's getting more and more mature. Then his feelings will grow even stronger, she was sure of it. In health and joy, may this pendant help them preserve these happy times. At this point, the scout reported to Ulain, causing the commander to exclaim in surprise. What did he just say? So, the tracked monsters had begun moving and changed course? Did that really mean the Demon King had already crossed that very Wendigo forest? Meanwhile, the monsters had indeed begun moving through the forest. One of the monsters urged everyone on, adding that His Majesty had ordered them to take the shortest route. The monsters sped up, but not by much. Goboroku thought his morale was flagging, but who could blame them? They had to cross countless mountains and forests to get here from the Demon King's domain. Everyone here was exhausted, although that yawning boy was an exception. Sebek yawned again and said he was so bored. Then he put his arm around Goboroku's shoulders and suggested they play a word game. The goblin asked him irritably, "Is he stupid?" He seemed too relaxed. Sebek sighed heavily and asked him if he knew what forest they were in. The goblin asked if there was anything unusual about it. The boy answered, "It's the Wendigo forest." They leap out of the darkness and scream in a terrifying voice. The warriors, hearing this, looked at him with apprehension. Goboroku, realizing what this could lead to, asked the boy to stop joking. He thought, Wendigo, he knows they exist, but he's never seen one. Sebek continued, "He's not joking. Does he understand that when a Wendigo appears before him, it means he's on death's door? Wendigos themselves never leave their territory. Therefore, people or animals should not enter their domain. Long ago, people tried to burn their lands from afar, but the fire starters disappeared without a trace. No monster or man could do that. Whether they're dealing with monsters or something else entirely, they bare their fangs at anyone who invades their land. Maybe they eat them, maybe they drag them off to another dimension. But when that happens, they're still dead." Goboroku, listening to him with his mouth open, thought with horror that even monsters were afraid of them. If that's true, then they should already be in the Demon King's army. None of them noticed a magical bird perched on a tree branch, watching their procession. The goblin continued to ponder. His Majesty had ordered them to capture the city of Ulain, but in this land, Wendigos coexist with people and nature. He'd ordered them to pass through, despite knowing about it. All these thoughts were giving him a headache. Suddenly, Sebek stopped and looked at an incomprehensible object lying nearby. Goburoku cautiously asked him if something was wrong. Seeing the object of his interest, the goblin exclaimed in fear, "What is this?" Sebek answered, "A totem. This thing was created to serve as a warning." The goblin exclaimed in fear, "Does he mean to tell me that up ahead lies the sacred ground of the Wendigo? He must warn the others. It's dangerous there. They need to find a safe path." Meanwhile, Sebek, pondering something, continued forward. The goblin called out to him in surprise, but the boy continued on. Goburoku cursed, and the monsters began to look around. What was that fog surrounding them? They needed to be on guard. Suddenly, the monsters began to choke, as if some magical force were suffocating them. Panic broke out among the troops. Suddenly, real monsters in the form of mummies appeared before them, letting out a terrifying roar and preparing to attack. The monsters turned back, and the commander shouted to the soldiers, "They need to run. Get out of here." Suddenly, the fog cleared, and the mummies disappeared. The commander exclaimed in bewilderment, "Where had those abominations gone?" He looked around, fell to his knees, and said contritely, "His unit, his men, only half of them remain." He knew it. Even if it had taken longer, they should have gone around. Then none of this would have happened. At that moment, Sebek emerged from behind the bushes and, also looking around, said in surprise, "They've lost a lot." Goburoku asked in bewilderment, "What the hell happened here?" The boy said, "If they got out with such minor losses, that's even good." The goblin retorted irritably, "There's nothing good about this." The commander thought perplexedly about the boy. This demon man was simply insane. Sebek, lost in thought, said, "Wendigos can't leave their lands, but they should be more careful." He asked the commander, "How about leaving this place?" The monster replied, "Yes, he knows that, but he shouldn't tell him what to do." The magical bird glanced once more at the enemy squad, flapped its wings, and flew away. Meanwhile, Ulain in his office apologized to Satis and the protagonist for the unexpected challenge, but he believed the reason was compelling. Satis replied, "Yes, thank you for that." Ulain continued, "The Wendigo forest is a forbidden, sacred territory. Even the most powerful monsters won't be able to enter it so easily. The enemy is crossing this forest and heading toward this city. Moreover, according to intelligence, a humanoid has been spotted among the demonic army." The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "A human in the Demon King's army?" Ulain added he'd read something about him in a previous report. It said that among the demon army there is a magical swordsman. The demon army wins every time he appears on the battlefield. If he appeared here, he's not sure they would emerge victorious. Satis said thoughtfully, "Regarding this swordsman, only one person came to mind. The strongest swordsman in the Demon King's army. He's a demon-human hybrid known as a furious crocodile. She'd never met him, but she was certain of one thing: he's incredibly strong. Perhaps even stronger than her." Ulain remarked with surprise, "A magical swordsman superior to a general? That was interesting." The girl added that the special power of his magical sword was unknown, but she knew the name it bore. If she wasn't mistaken, it was called Apophis, the snake venom. MC thought, Apophis, the snake venom wielded by Sebek, the furious crocodile. There was a similar drawing in Ahas's letter. Ulain also considered it. He wouldn't lose. But this battle was his alone. Given their local military strength, it would be a tough fight. He stood up and, unfolding a map of the area, said that according to his calculations, the earliest they would arrive was afternoon, in 2 days. He was grateful for the valuable information, and he knew they had come here to stroll and rest, but such was fate. They needed to leave the city as soon as possible. The protagonist addressed him by name. The boy looked at him carefully, understanding his intentions, and said that no matter how strong the enemy, he, Osiris, was not so weak-willed as to take pleasure in asking a resting child for help. He immediately ordered his subordinates to send a messenger to the capital. Let them invite a representative of their soldiers. His chief aide reported to him that everything would be done and added that he should allow the mobilization of adventurers. Ulain gave his approval. The allies left him and returned to the inn. The protagonist approached the window and thought, Osiris. The face he made showed he wanted them to fight by his side. At that moment, Satis called out to him and, apologizing to him, said she was lost in thought. Looking at him more closely, she noticed he was worried about Ulain. The protagonist gasped. Was it that obvious? The girl laughed and answered him. It was written all over his face. Honestly, they both hide their emotions poorly. MC sadly clutched his head and clarified. Really? Satis looked at his confused expression with interest, moved closer to him and said let him tell her if they should run. If they just keep doing this, the same things might happen. That's what she thinks. The protagonist, surprised by her question, remained silent. The girl continued. She would like to live in peace with him, and that will never change. She wonders if they can achieve this if they keep running. She still hasn't overcome the fears of the past, but she feels this is wrong. The protagonist interrupts her and asks she should tell him what to do. The astonished girl addressed him by name, confused. He took her hands and gave a prepared speech about Ulain. He couldn't think the same way as he, Osiris, did, but he'd done enough reckless things. He could fight, not for the country, not for the adults, please. He was Osiris, his friend, and he was the most important person to him. Therefore, he wanted to fight for him and for himself. Satis, confused, told him not to worry. Had he forgotten who she was? She was a woman who had commanded military strategists for a long time. And she had a plan. She spoke the last words with a smile. She understood his intentions. After a while, Ulain, who was standing on the watchtower, was approached by his subordinate. The commander asked him, had they managed to contact the capital's troops and request reinforcements? The knight answered, yes, sir. They were heading their way right now. Ulain said with satisfaction, is that so? And looked at the monsters approaching the city walls. He thought deeply. The enemy was barely able to stand due to their wounds, but even so, he shouldn't let his guard down. There were still warriors with magical weapons among their ranks. If only they could hold out until help arrived, then all would be well. Meanwhile, Shoto, lying in ambush in the forest, saw the monsters and wondered if the royal army had already arrived. At that moment, Satis, using her telepathy, contacted him and asked if he could hear her. When the protagonist confirmed this, she told him exactly as he had said. Yes, it was worth waiting a whole day. The day before, they had discussed her strategy. She said that this time they would need his stealth skills. While the royal army besieged the city, he would have to wait for an opportune moment and sneak up behind them while he could. The army was led by a humanoid lizard, their primary target. She would use telepathy to inform him when it was time to strike. He remarked admiringly, magic, it turns out, was a useful thing. The girl asked him to take the necklace she'd given him and made him promise to return alive. And now, he informed her that he was almost at the edge of the forest, observing the enemy army. Satis, assessing the situation through binoculars, told him that now was the perfect moment. Let him act. She wished him luck. The protagonist thanked her and replied that he was beginning to put his plan into action. MC rushed forward. Ahead of the enemy, Ulain and his army attacked. Swinging his sword, damaging the enemies, he shouted, "They will never escape my weapon." The monster commander cursed when he saw the boy's power as he soared into the air with his flying armor and ordered his squadron to open fire. Dragons soared into the sky and began attacking Ulain from the air, belching their deadly flames. He deftly dodged their attacks and exclaimed, "Not bad at all, but if they think they can finish him off so easily, they're sorely mistaken." He activated his King's Heart skill and summoned a 2-in-1 magic sword. 2 powerful magic circles appeared before him. Ulain declared in an ominous tone, "It's time to show what he's truly made of." He used his summons to attack the enemy from the air, not forgetting the flying dragons. Goboroku exclaimed in surprise, "That's the power of Ulain's sword." He felt uneasy. Sebek, destroying his opponents, looked up at the sky and exclaimed, "Wow, it looks like they're attacking from the air. It's breathtaking." The goblin asked him, perplexed, how he could remain so careless at a time like this. He should take it more seriously. The boy replied, all right, he'd try to improve, but first he'd save his own skin. He swung his sword and destroyed the female knight who had snuck up on the goblin from behind. Goboroku looked at his fallen opponent in confusion. Sebek noticed why he was frozen. There was a battle going on here. After all, did he want to die? The goblin said regretfully, his blade would never harm a woman. Sebek was perplexed, but he was a monster, wasn't he? And besides, people like her must be killed. She's their enemy. It's so obvious. Goboroku said, first and foremost, he's a soldier, not a goblin. Sebek stroked his bald head in irritation and said, he's simply impossible. Suddenly, the boy stared at something in surprise and told the goblin that he'd leave the rest to him before running forward. Sebek spotted the protagonist on the battlefield and approaching him, thought, wow, what a wonderful encounter. The protagonist had cut off his opponent's head and thought it seemed his mission was accomplished. At that moment, he felt someone's magical pressure. MC turned and saw Sebek approaching him. Taking a fighting stance and gripping his sword tighter, Shoto said, "Can it be him?" The demon smiled and remarked, "So they already know each other? He's all alone here?" A bold move for such a young boy. He reminded him of himself as a child. He was just as reckless. Let him tell him his name. The protagonist remained silent, carefully watching his opponent and calculating his possible moves. The boy continued, "His name is Sebek, though that's not his real name, but then, he never had one." The protagonist, seeing his dark essence, couldn't understand what was wrong with him. The protagonist answered him. His name was Shoto. He was a simple traveler, and he owed much to the people of this city. Therefore, he had come to fight for them. Sebek exclaimed, what a wonderful name he had. And why was he here? Whose orders did he obey? The protagonist told him he was here of his own free will, and he obeyed no one. Sebek chuckled and remarked, well, in that case, wouldn't he like to chat with him a little longer? MC lunged at him, but Sebek dodged his blow and countered. The protagonist had also anticipated this move and deftly avoided his attack. The boy's weapon hit the ground, which cracked from the force of the blow. The protagonist began to attack him again, but Sebek, displaying lightning speed, parried all his blows. Shoto noted to himself that his opponent had changed his trajectory. Sebek swung his sword decisively and slashed MC, cutting his cheek. The protagonist covered the wound and cursed. Suddenly, the enemy sniffed the air and exclaimed, what a wonderful scent. It was his youthful scent, so pungent, so much better than the scum he'd killed before. Shoto thought in surprise, this guy's crazy. At that moment, Satis telepathically asked him what was going on. He replied that he'd been engaged in a fight with a warrior named Sebek. He'd heard of his strength, but he hadn't imagined it was this bad. Satis, in disbelief, wondered, did she hear right? Are Shoto and Sebek fighting? She shouted at him to run, to get out of there. The protagonist replied that he would have hidden from him long ago if he could, and besides, he couldn't just leave him here. Sebek looked at him with a smirk. The protagonist looked closely at his opponent and thought, half man, half monster. That's what he'd heard about him. He possessed remarkable speed and strength, far exceeding that of an ordinary human. But even so, he was stronger than he'd thought, not to mention his perfectly honed weapon skills. And his sword was like a hound, relentlessly pursuing its prey in pursuit of justice. The sword of a true killer, unencumbered by any obligations. How much blood had he had to shed to become such? Suddenly, Sebek told him his sword was unusual. On the battlefield, they were very similar. One could say they were the same. The protagonist asked him what he meant. The guy replied that despite this, there were several fundamental differences between them. He realized this when they clashed. For example, he, Shoto, always cares for others, but he has no respect for himself. The MC was surprised himself? Sebek continued, constantly telling himself he was worthless and dirty. He tried to love and respect anyone but himself. Fighting such a man was impossibly boring. It couldn't be done. He should love himself and value his own life more. Wouldn't he like to go out onto the battlefield and kill infidels with him? The boy extended his hand in agreement and peace. He continued, life for others, not for oneself, long or short. What difference did it make when it ended, if it was so empty and meaningless? The protagonist rudely cut him off. Maybe he should shut up already? His sweet words had no effect on him. He was just wasting his breath. A mutant idiot. Sebek restrained his negative emotions, laughed, and said, what bad words! How could such a strong boy like him treat his kind uncle so badly? And he liked him so much. They both lunged at each other and crossed their swords. From the sidelines, one could admire how skillfully they wielded their weapons and fought. Blocking each other's blows, parrying them, dodging, and attacking, they seemed to dance. The speed of their swords made the air ring, and leaves from nearby trees were torn from the shockwaves, whirling and mercilessly sliced by their swords. As they crossed swords again, Sebek thought admiringly, this guy really does fight well. It's getting really intense here, but if he makes even one mistake, he'll finish him off right there. The protagonist thought about his opponent, how much power he possesses. He repels every attack with double speed, not seeing a single weak spot. They clashed again, even more fiercely. Their weapons glittered, sparks flew from the contact of metal, neither yielded to the other. The protagonist seized the moment when his opponent opened up for a split second and struck him across the torso, deeply wounding him. Sebek exhaled loudly and noisily in surprise and pain. The protagonist quickly moved behind him and was about to strike, but Sebek exclaimed, how predictable. He flashed his weapon behind his back, blocking MC's blow, and told him that if he was going to finish him off, he could have done it more gracefully. Shoto responded, I see. And he, half human, half demon, only knows how to brag? Sebek laughed and remarked, just like him, huh? The protagonist shifted position, stood in front of his opponent and said, he's a joker, right? They crossed swords again and Sebek said, this isn't going to work. How about they just unsheath their magic swords and settle this like adults? The protagonist responded, he agreed. It was high time. Just let him know. No matter how powerful his sword, he'll tear it to pieces. Sebek suddenly adopted an unusual stance, leaning forward on an outstretched leg and lowering his weapon to the ground. MC noted this and decided, oh well, in a moment, the outcome of their battle would be decisive. Sebek traced magical signs on the ground with his sword and swung it. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise. What? The barrier turned a hail of arrows into splinters? The guy muttered in disappointment. Well, who reveals the secrets of a trick before the show even starts? At that moment, Satis came on the line, informing the protagonist that reinforcements from the capital had arrived. They had won. He replied that they had won, of course, but they still had to deal with this strange guy. The girl exclaimed. She was asking him to hold on. She was already running to his aid. He objected. She shouldn't do this. She should stop. Suddenly, Goboroku appeared out of nowhere, terrified, and told the guy that they were retreating. Their army is routed. The men sent for reinforcements, and now there are too many. Why did he suddenly flee the front lines? Sebek, without even turning to face his ally, looking the enemy straight in the eye, replied, nothing. There's still time before the army arrives. They'll have just enough time to have some fun with Shoto. The protagonist analyzed the situation. He thought about Sebek being surrounded by an invisible barrier. If he were to fall within its range, nothing good would happen. Perhaps he should wait for Satis. If she arrived in time, she might be able to repel the barrier's attack on him, but then he'd have to put her in danger. The barrier was Sebek's trump card. If he could overcome it, he'd emerge victorious. So there was only one way out of this situation. He needed to do it faster than the barrier could react, faster than Sebek would even notice. He had to move as fast as he could. Shoto dashed forward as fast as he could, and just as he touched the barrier, Ulain, appearing next to him, shouted at his opponent. Did he really think he could escape his sword? Satis turned to Shoto, expressing hope she wasn't too late, adding that she'd brought reinforcements. Sebek looked at the protagonist with respect and exclaimed, he's a clever man. He managed to trick him. The three of them began attacking the enemy's barrier, but all their attacks failed. Ulain cursed and pointed out, it's a universal automatic interception system. Satis was surprised. It's impossible. This is magic of the highest order. It strikes everyone and everything indiscriminately. The protagonist thought, now that his allies were here, maybe he could finally do something. Although, no, they could defeat him together. The three of them took a wait-and-see attitude, prepared for any turn of events. At that moment, Goboroku called out to Sebek again in a warning tone. The boy chuckled, turned sharply, and ran back. Shoto shouted at him in bewilderment. Where was he going? The boy turned to MC in response, telling him to have fun here instead. He'd had enough fun so far. He hoped they'd be able to play together again someday. The surprised goblin, who had been watching all this, emerged from his hiding place, bowed to his allies, surprising them, and ran after Sebek. Satis said in disappointment, "Well, I never. He just ran away." Ulain approached Shoto and lightly slapped him on the crown of his head. The protagonist gasped, clutched his head, and indignantly exclaimed, "What's wrong with him? That hurt." The commander exclaimed, "There you go." He knew something was wrong with the enemy army. He grabbed MC by the shoulders and shouted, "What the hell was he thinking? How reckless do you have to be to go out onto the battlefield alone?" Satis shielded the protagonist, and Ulain angrily told him to stop. The girl added, by the way, that she had come up with the plan, and it was simply perfect. And Shoto simply wanted to reciprocate the favor of the people who had once helped him so much. The commander sighed, saying that's why he was surprised that there were those among them who were so willing to sacrifice their own skins. He looked at the protagonist with warmth in his eyes and remarked, "Well, what?" It seemed he should thank him for helping get rid of Sebek. Thanks to his distraction, they were able to clear the front without a problem. Now they would go with him to the city and meet up with the soldiers. He thought they would want to thank him too. Shoto answered him. He didn't need gratitude. Ulain firmly declared that he would not accept refusals. It would be very rude of them not to celebrate the victory with them. And overall, it would be nice to move to a better location. Otherwise, they'd attract too much attention here. Didn't they agree? And so, the battle ended, with the humans victorious. It's over. The lights come on, the curtain falls. The joyful exclamations of the soldiers who had managed to endure this difficult battle echoed everywhere. And of course, none of them remembered Shoto, whose contribution to the victory had been no small one. The protagonist, however, wasn't too bothered. He watched the jubilant crowd with a smile, thinking that he'd never sought to be a hero to millions. He'd only wanted to help his friends in their time of need and protect those dear to him. And that was all he wanted. After a while, the protagonist indignantly told the commander, no, he can't take it. Ulain insisted he wouldn't rest until Shoto took it. The protagonist replied that the most important thing to them was that the city was out of danger, and that was all. They hadn't started all this for gratitude, and certainly not for the money. The commander replied, however, the city's salvation is largely their doing. Whatever they say, their contribution here is rather small. Satis told MC, come on, if they're given it, they should take it. If it were so inconvenient, Osiris wouldn't have tried to persuade them so, right? There's nothing wrong with that. The protagonist asked her, is that true? After a while, Ulain said, okay, let them take their time. Since they've already taken the money, maybe they'd both agree to work for them? Wouldn't they be interested in trying that? The allies stared at him in surprise. The guy continued, he thought quite highly of their abilities. Let them imagine how many people they could help with such skills. So what? Do they want to join the army and fight by their side? The allies conferred among themselves, and Satis said, unfortunately, they're parting ways now, and they apologize. Of course, if they ever had to fight someone again, they would help. But as they had this time, they would fight not for the country or society, but most likely for themselves. Ulain said sadly, that's a shame, but perhaps it was for the best. Well, it seemed their conversation had dragged on a bit. In any case, he was grateful to both of them for their work, and not just for getting rid of the troop commander. It was only because they managed to force that Sebek guy to retreat that they won. The protagonist thought about that guy. Perhaps, if he had run into that invisible barrier, that guy would have simply cut him to pieces. He had never encountered anything like that before. He had never encountered such a magical sword, let alone one with such a stance. He wouldn't defeat it so easily. MC remembered the letter that said that if he wanted to wield unseen power, he would give him a test. That letter, if he passed the test it spoke of, would he be able to become stronger? He didn't know. Perhaps it would be better to ask his friends for advice. He said aloud to his allies that he wanted to show them both a letter. Ulain remembered, speaking of which. He had a letter addressed to Shoto. He'd taken it for safekeeping. It was from a man named Genda, from the village of Benjamin. He handed the letter to the protagonist. Satis thoughtfully remarked, a letter, or rather, two already. What are they about? With the protagonist's permission, Ulain opened the letter, found a map of the area, and read the inscription. It addressed MC as a child of storms and destruction. When he received this letter, it would mean an obstacle had arisen in his life's path. If he had strayed from the right path and was mired in suffering, vainly trying to find his way back, he should follow the clue on the map to the place it indicated. The commander pointed to a drawing on the map and said the symbol of a snake and crocodile is Sebek's. And in that case, the meaning of that phrase about strength and testing immediately becomes clear. Not everyone receives a letter from a Wendigo. Perhaps they are trying to warn him of something. The protagonist mused thoughtfully that it was likely his destiny to once again confront Sebek. Moreover, if he wanted to remain close to Satis, he simply had to defeat him. The commander told him the location marked on the map was very far away. The protagonist reassured him that everything was fine. They would replenish their food supplies and set out at dawn. Ulain smiled and advised them to try the local delicacies before leaving. They wouldn't regret it. He left them, going about his business. MC turned to the girl, and seeing her sitting with her head in her hands, cursed. She asked him why he hadn't told her about it before. Or perhaps he had wanted to, but perhaps it was partly her fault that he was having such a hard time understanding everything. Shoto objected. No, that wasn't it. He should apologize to her. He simply lacked the courage to tell her everything. Satis insisted firmly. No, on the contrary, she had to think about how difficult it must be to live with such a heavy burden on his shoulders. And besides, the contents of the letter did indicate that he would have to fight Sebek. She looked at him for a long moment and remarked with a smile, but now he had her, and she would do everything she could to help him. The protagonist was touched by her speech. He thanked her and asked if he could ask her one question. Do she think she loves herself? How does she perceive herself? The girl asked him in surprise, asking why he was suddenly asking her such a question. He answered her, actually, before the fight with this guy, he never paid attention to it. But Sebek told him that he, Shoto, always cared for others, but at the same time, he had no respect for himself. He also told him that they were similar, and if he loved combat and fighting as much as he did, then he would love himself too. Life for others, but not for oneself. Long or short, what difference did it make when it ended, if it was so empty and meaningless? The protagonist was silent for a moment, and added, and if now he still somehow understood what it was like to love other people, then why love himself? And how that happened? He didn't understand. What did she think about this? The girl was silent for a moment, thinking about his words, and then said, she agreed with him. He was surprised. Is that so? Satis told him yes. Recently she too finally understood what it was like to love someone, but she couldn't give a precise answer if someone asked if she loved herself. The protagonist was surprised. Really? She looked at him and asked if he'd let her ask him something. When Sebek said they were equal in battle, what did he think of that? And did he agree with his words that if he loved combat, he'd love himself? The protagonist answered her, confused, but he'd never thought of combat as the meaning of his life, and he didn't think he'd ever be able to enjoy it. The only thing he truly enjoyed was traveling with her, exploring new horizons together, meeting interesting people. Satis smiled, pulled him close, pressed him to her chest, and said, then he'll understand perfectly well what it means to value himself and his life. She looked him in the eyes and said that she really liked Shoto like this. MC was very embarrassed by her closeness and such words. She went to the door and added that she wished she could someday learn to value herself as much as he did. What if she fell in love with him? And then what would she do? The protagonist, overcoming his embarrassment and indecision, offered to go through everything together. He grabbed her hand and added that he was sure they would overcome everything together. She looked at him in surprise and said, it seemed so. They thought alike. The girl smiled and suggested he go into town. They would stock up on everything they needed, go to some bars, and get something to eat. They were leaving tomorrow anyway, so why not have some fun one last time? The protagonist happily agreed to her proposal. The next day, having gotten ready, Satis told him, well, it was time for them to go. They walked out the city's main gates and unexpectedly saw Ulain approaching. The protagonist asked him if he'd come to see them off. The boy replied, of course he had. Still, he was sorry they'd refused. It's not every day one gets the opportunity to fight alongside such remarkable people. He placed his hand on his chest and told them with all his heart that he thanked them for everything they'd done for them. Thanks to them, the city could sleep peacefully. If they encountered any difficulties, they should call on him, the guardian of law and justice, and he would rush to their aid. The protagonist replied, with joy. If necessary, they would definitely do so. He would protect them, wouldn't he? Ulain exclaimed, of course. Otherwise, he wouldn't be Osiris, the champion of justice. MC reacted with delight to his statement. Surprised, Satis thought she hadn't known he liked such things. The allies said goodbye to the hero and set off. The girl suddenly remembered and said she'd almost forgotten the most important thing. Taking out a shell-shaped pendant, she told the protagonist to put it on. Satis placed the pendant around his neck herself, smiling and saying, it really suits him. The protagonist happily thanked her. Walking beside her, he said, it's so funny if you think about it. They're so different, but they're on the same path. The girl agreed. He's right, and no obstacles can stop them. For some reason, her heart pounded as she thought about it. He agreed with her, and so did he. Sometime later, Hudora in the dungeon was sitting on her bed, deep in thought. At that moment, Kilim came to her and told her they had come to see her. The girl handcuffed Hudora's hands, thinking they were being cautious. Passing the window, the girl looked out at the village and thought, a settlement for eccentrics. She grinned, so she was one of them now. Perhaps fate itself had led her here in search of Shoto. Before she'd thought she was on the right path. She'd followed her father's teachings unquestioningly, keeping in her heart a hatred of evil and respect for good. Where had she gone wrong then? Kilim, meanwhile, led her into a room, the door of which slammed shut. Scarlet and Rito were sitting at the table. Hudora sat across from them, and the village chief asked her how she was. The girl's answer, as she could see, was terrible. Scarlet said she'd heard a lot about her adventures. They say she was one of those brave souls who intended to destroy the Demon King, right? The girl told her that all that was in the past. There was no turning back, neither to the kingdom nor to the team. She bowed her head before them so many times, begging for their return. And what was the point? She pointed to her handcuffs and added, it's late, so what's the point in bringing it up? Let the village chief just look, she's a criminal, she said bitterly. She was once a heroine, protecting the kingdom and her father. She was one of those responsible for the people's hopes for a bright future. And what has become of her now? Scarlet pointed out. Isn't that really what happened? Of course, she'd heard plenty from the esteemed Lady Satis and Shoto about her situation, but she'd never imagined it was this bad. It was as if a demon had possessed her. Hudora spread her arms as far as her handcuffs would allow and told the woman, "It is true." She'd once been one of those who agreed that removing Shoto from the team was the right decision. And what happened afterward? The team was never able to fill the gap left by his departure, and the harmony between them was destroyed. It was as if everyone suddenly hated each other. To this day, she has no answer for why. After all, she was convinced until the very end that they were doing the right thing. Tears welled up in her eyes. She thought, of course, it was a great shame to lose such a good fighter and strategist. In battle, he fought as if it were his last, giving his all. She always looked down on him. In her eyes, he was a savage, a barbarian, a soulless killing machine. Therefore, at that moment, his fate was obvious. She saw the world only in black and white. She judged others based solely on the moral standards her father had taught her. That's why in Shoto, who so desperately tried to survive in a world alien to him, she saw only a cruel, demonic being. And once again, looking down at him, she convinced herself that she was much better than this boy. However, suddenly he declared that he no longer wanted to be a warrior, that he wanted to follow his own path. He told him so. He was no longer a warrior, and he had no desire to return to their heroic team. She said it out loud. Until then, she thought he hated everyone and everything. His enemies, battles, evil. But then it turned out that he had never felt this hatred for anyone. He didn't even try to avenge what happened, although he should have. It was strange. She should have noticed earlier that even in the heat of battle, he remained equally indifferent to both enemies and allies, and didn't judge people for their actions. Ridu said, "Did he dare to suggest that this was his true nature?" Hudora asked him in surprise. "Nature?" The man continued. "Usually, soldiers going into battle for their country are instilled with hatred for the enemy, and they easily destroy them." The same thing had happened to this boy. He was sure that in the beginning, Shoto truly hated his enemies. But as always happens, he gradually came to the realization that this hatred was senseless and empty. However, once this epiphany has occurred, it's usually too late to flee the battlefield, especially for soldiers. They can only fight on. To fight, while clearly understanding the absurdity of what was happening for the country, for her people, and for heroes like her. Hudora exclaimed in surprise. What? She remembered what his eyes were like after the murder. Cold and empty, so utterly devoid of the childish quality. Did he really feel nothing at all? She wondered, monster or man. Everyone feared him and expected no mercy. But in reality, he was anything but. He only appeared to be a cold-blooded killer. In reality, he believed that such feelings were useless, that showing them wouldn't make things better. Such a disappointing conclusion. Why had no one tried to show him even a shred of kindness back then? Why hadn't she offered him a helping hand when he needed it? He always ate alone, away from everyone. Why had she never approached him? Why hadn't she invited him to eat with her? She continued mournfully out loud. Wouldn't that be the embodiment of the very humanity her father had so zealously taught her? It seemed she had never truly grasped the meaning of the word. Scarlet told her that humanity was nothing more than pity for others. It turned out her father wasn't so great after all. Hudora slammed her fist on the table and exclaimed, "But she'd lived her life only by what he taught her." She laughed ironically and remarked, "And what had happened to her life?" Scarlet looked at her carefully and said, "Mrs. Satis is a wonderful woman. Although she didn't know her back when they were feuding, she loves Shoto with all her heart. Besides, she believes the boy has changed greatly thanks to her influence." Hudora asked in surprise, "Satis's influence?" The village chief mentioned that she no longer had any connection with the Demon King's army. She didn't know the details, unfortunately, but the fact remains. But she knows that Shoto will finally love himself. Hudora smiled. Well, and she'd tried to use him as a tool to achieve her goals. She thought she'd probably been very wrong. The village chief remarked that, judging by her expression, she was already feeling much better. The girl stood up, rested her hands on the table, and turning to the village chief, told her that she sincerely apologized for the irreparable harm caused to the village by her thoughtless actions and misguided path. Bowing, she asked for punishment, adding that she deserved it. Scarlet asked in surprise, "Punishment?" The woman turned to Rido and asked him what he should do with her. The man looked surprised. "She's asking him about this? Well, he'll tell you." Ridu turned to Kilim and told her to first uncuff Hudora. The girl did as he was told, smiling. Hudora exclaimed in bewilderment, "But why?" The man told her there was no specific reason. He was simply a little unsettled by the sight of such a young girl sitting before him in handcuffs. Although by nature, he was quite the barbarian and villain. The girl exclaimed in amazement, so he was a villain. The village elder stood up and asked her if she needed a reason. It wasn't the most cheerful reason, but she got one. It reminded her of them at her age. The woman placed her hands on her shoulders, and looking into her eyes, told her that from now on, she was free. She could leave the village as soon as she recovered her health and recuperated. As far as she knew, a local healer visited her regularly, but he was only able to heal her body and soul, not allow them to relax. So, let her stay in the village a little longer. Hudora exclaimed in confusion. But why? What had she done to deserve such treatment? She was mired in sin, the vile creature. Did she deserve this? Scarlet thought for a moment and then said, deserves. After all, this was a village for eccentrics, and she was its headmistress. When they left, Hudora returned to her cage. Kilim asked her if she was really comfortable here. She thought she wouldn't want to be here anymore. The girl answered that everything was fine. Another day or two wouldn't make a difference. For some reason, she wanted to stay here now. Kilim left, thinking that Hudora could have said she didn't want to. She would have sent her somewhere else. When Kilim left, Hudora grabbed the edge of the bed with her hands, still unable to believe what had happened, although her eyes were already shining with happiness. After some time, Shiom, a wandering priestess, wandering along, tapping her staff on the ground. She sniffed the air and said, the scent of the sea breeze is almost gone. The wind is dry, probably coming from the mountain range. They should make a short rest stop. Spotting a tree under which they could camp, she saw two people sitting beneath its canopy, and was surprised to see someone already there. She approached Satis and the protagonist, apologized, and asked if she could join them. There was enough shade under the tree for everyone. The allies replied, yes, of course, the priestess said. Simply delightful. What luck. May they forgive her for disturbing you, and thanked them. Afterwards, the woman told them her name and added that she was a wandering priestess, wandering the world to and fro, helping those in need. Such is her difficult lot. And who will they be? Satis and Shoto told her their names. Chiome asked them if they were heading to the ancient ruins of the Hope Mesa Temple. She was just about to go there. Who knows? Maybe it's fate? The travelers, having rested, set out. After some time, Satis was surprised to notice how radically the view around her had changed. Compared to what they had seen earlier, this landscape looked more depressing. The protagonist said, wow, there are so many kites flying in the sky. Although, no, these birds look more like condors than kites. Kiyome suddenly said, condors are birds, right? She was attacked by one, such a nasty one. It stole her entire lunch, and she didn't even have time to properly get it out. The allies assured the woman not to worry. If anything happened, they would drive them away immediately. The woman laughed and thanked them. She added that she'd never gotten along well with birds, especially crows. Their caws would start screaming, and you could hear them cawing everywhere, and then you had to get away from them. MC told her it was okay. They wouldn't touch her this time. They'd take care of that. They were completely confident in their abilities, of all things. The priestess chuckled and said, completely then. Only now did the protagonist notice that she was leaning on a cane, as if it helped her see what was happening around her. After some time, they arrived at Katajita Gorge. After surveying the desolate, rocky terrain, the protagonist exclaimed in surprise, what a strange place. It was even worse here than outside. He felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Satis answered him that this place was created in symbiosis between people and nature. It had a very deep history. Perhaps these lands hold something mystical, mysterious. Shiome told them she navigates by the wind and the sounds around her. However, from their description, she can roughly imagine what this place is like. They didn't even notice the orcs watching them. MC approached the sign and said, it says here that if you go a little further, the road will lead them to the temple you need. Suddenly, he cautiously motioned for both of them to stop and looked up. There, on a high mountain, stood an orc. Before the allies could blink, they were surrounded by both orcs and the humans collaborating with them. The allies stood back to back, covering each other and preparing to attack. The largest orc descended last. He landed, laughed, and said, what a meeting! He hadn't seen Satis in a long time. He hadn't expected to meet her in these parts. The girl exclaimed in amazement. It can't be, he said smugly. Who else? The king himself. She asked him in bewilderment. What was he doing in such a place? She was sure his army hadn't advanced that far yet. There had been no information about that. The orc king repeated her question. Why was he here? The monster laughed and continued. Well, he'll tell her why, although he didn't think it would change anything. He left the magical army? Did she understand? From now on, he acts alone. He betrayed the name of their king. Now he is his own king. The protagonist asked Satis what kind of guy he was. The girl answered, the orc king. He, like her, had once commanded the demon king's army. However, this all seemed suspicious. She told him he was saying he betrayed the demon king. He was one of those the king trusted more than himself. They stood side by side on the battlefield. At his instigation, he had been included in a squad of elite warriors. So why did he need to give up everything to please a gang of bandits? The girl added thoughtfully, no matter how you look at it, so far it looks like he was simply kicked out of the army, doesn't it? Perhaps he had been treated the same way she had been. The orc exhaled loudly and shouted at her to shut up. This was his decision, his and no one else's. Unlike the king, these people value him as a person, his talents, his intelligence, and his wisdom. As she could see, he now had his own army, and why then should he serve anyone? Huffing angrily, he continued, if he could create his own kingdom and proclaim himself its king. The protagonist asked Satis if their army was really that bad, if they could so easily dispose of their best commanders. The girl answered, no. The orc said, since she had so conveniently come his way, he was inviting her to join the ranks of his loyal vassals. She must accept, or the outcome would be dire. Satis rudely cut him off, telling him not to dare dictate to her. The orc king remarked perplexedly, but hadn't she been abandoned like the last piece of trash? He remembered what she was like back then. She flirted left and right, trying to boost her value through cheap flattery and her own charm. What had she become? She's become so pathetic, wandering around like a lost soul in the company of an eccentric and a runt. She's decided to try a taste of the miserable human life? Enough, though. He called his loyal subjects to attack and ordered them to tear their opponents to shreds. The protagonist drew his blade and suggested the girl give them a good kick. He'd deal with them here, and in the meantime, she should take Chiome to safety. Satis answered him icily. Everything was fine. Let him leave the Orc King to her. MC exclaimed in bewilderment, but she's still weak, right? The girl said she'd recovered enough to fight. They'd insulted her, the one he knew and accepted as she was. This was the first battle she'd lead since commanding the demon army. She was quite confident in her own strength, and she could overcome this. She had to stand up to them, and he, meanwhile, should protect Chiome. Shoto readily acknowledged her words. Satis assumed a fighting stance. The orc remarked, was she going to fight him face to face? She was a magical being, one who needed a constant supply of magical energy. In a place like this, she simply didn't stand a chance. Moreover, unlike her, he had a huge advantage in close combat. This was interesting. He'd ordered his troops to destroy Chiome and Shoto, and he would deal with Satis personally. The orc exclaimed, forward! These pathetic idiots were worthless compared to them. They'd chop them into mincemeat. Satis, adjusting her glasses, said, very well then. If he wanted to kill her so badly, let him at least try touching her first. She prepared for battle. The protagonist, activating a protective barrier for himself and Chiome, looked at Satis and thought, the past has left many wounds in her heart. He didn't know if they'd lasted. He was so afraid for her. Still, if she claimed she was ready to face the enemy again, he believed her. But for now, he couldn't relax. He had to do something. He looked at the orc's army and noted there were quite a few enemies among them, and he still had to protect Chiome. She was blind, which meant she was far more vulnerable than they were. He wondered if he'd be able to deal with them without a magic sword. Preparing to attack, he called her by name and told her he'd clear the way for her. As soon as he gave her the signal, she should run and not look back. The girl placed her hand on his shoulder from behind and told him with a smile that she understood everything. It was him, Shoto, right? He shouldn't worry. There was no need to strain himself. She'd deal with them herself. The priestess, still tapping her cane, approached the bandits and asked if they would be so kind as to tell her roughly where they were standing. They didn't think they had the right to threaten a poor girl with a weapon, did they? That wouldn't be nice. She advised them not to act rashly and to retreat before it was too late. The bandits, after initially exchanging puzzled glances, couldn't resist laughing and mockingly remarking that this was unheard of. Apparently, using brute force against her was illegal. What an interesting girl. And what would she do to them if they didn't listen to her? Chiome asked them with a smile if they could please stop talking to her like that. It frightened her a little, as they could see they had no money and there was nothing to take from them. One of the bandits exclaimed, perhaps they should just sit quietly here and wait until their commanders finished fighting. How could she possibly imagine this? They couldn't disobey their leader. It was his order, so she should stand still and prepare to die. The bandits prepared to attack. The protagonist anxiously called out the priestess's name and thought, this is bad. She couldn't see them, which meant she wouldn't be able to dodge their attack in time. Just as he was about to shield her, he was suddenly surprised to feel a ripple in the air. He was surprised. Was this current of air coming from the wind sword that had appeared in Chiome's hands? The girl calmly destroyed several bandits and kneeling said, they seemed too arrogant to her. It seemed their mood had infected her. The bandits were perplexed. What was wrong with her? She didn't look like an ordinary blind woman. The protagonist, surprised, told her, this is a secret art. As far as he knew, only experienced warriors from distant lands possessed it. If he wasn't mistaken, they were called samurai. Could she really be one of them? The girl grinned and said, I think she's been found out. Oh well, it couldn't be helped. He activated his magical energy. Chiome asked him what he was doing. He didn't have to get involved in this. He, drawing a magic sword from the magic circle, told her it was fine. They would fight them together. He, too, had once been a soldier, so he was trained in the art of combat. The girl remarked conspiratorially, taking him at his word. He doubted, but could they handle all the bandits? She snorted and said it was common. There weren't that many of them. Shoto admired how tough samurai really were. He divided the opponents into two groups and shouted to his partner, he'll leave this part to her. The girl told him to be careful so as not to cut himself. The protagonist shouted, understood, and they engaged in battle. The allies simultaneously attacked the bandits. Chiome acted as if she could see her enemies. Her blows were lightning fast and precise. After a short while, the protagonist looked around and told her apparently that was all. By the way, he hadn't thought she was so strong. He was pleasantly surprised. The girl laughed and replied that he was no slouch either. Although, judging by his voice, he was clearly younger than her. At that moment he noticed blood and dirt stains on her clothes, but they began to disappear. She told him, oh that, she's special in that way. The gods have blessed her. She can easily remove any dirt or dust from clothes, but at the same time, she herself is a dirty stain, and she can't scrub that off. The protagonist responded encouragingly, but if she couldn't, that didn't mean others couldn't. And she didn't want to die, so that's why she'd become so strong, right? He could only guess, as he didn't know the true reason, but he felt obliged to note that she wielded a sword expertly. Chiome, putting on her hat, replied that she truly didn't want to die, so she pretended to be a sweet simpleton with a dagger tucked under her bosom. Sometimes you have to use it, Sometimes, not even for yourself, but for someone else. Sometimes it's to her own detriment, but to others' benefit, and sometimes vice versa. That's just her life. The protagonist looked at Satis and thought, only the Orc King and she remain. The opponents took a breather. The Orc said to Satis, I wonder how long she can withstand his blows. She answered him. All she could do was note that fighting him now was much easier than when he was the army commander. The Orc cried out in irritation. Don't let her talk nonsense. In her opinion, are they playing childish games here? She doesn't think she can so easily lower his guard. Even if she did, her magic still wouldn't be enough. Satis folded her hands in a prayer gesture and said, then they will test it now. They will conduct, so to speak, a small test of her abilities. She took a deep breath, removed her glasses and said, yes, she really does talk about how brave and strong she is. Putting her glasses back, she continued, as a commander, she often went too far, putting her pride above all else. And if something didn't work out for her, she immediately became angry. The Orc laughed at her words. What revelations? Was she suddenly overcome with nostalgia? Or had she decided to repent before her death? The protagonist asked her in surprise, what's wrong? The girl insistently told him to step away from her. After that, she put her glasses back on and told him she believed now was the time to use her special talent. She hadn't thought about it in a long time, and yet she hadn't lost her knack for it yet. If there was no other way to protect him than to do this, she would devote all her strength to it. The protagonist was shocked by her words, but he noticed the many rings on the Orc's hand and thought with alarm that these rings easily countered her magic. If these items were real, then things were bad. He told her that he should fight him. Chiome, placing her hand on his shoulder, told him to trust her. There was no one in the world stronger than a woman who was determined to protect someone dear to her. The protagonist answered her with excitement. When he thought that something could happen to her, his heart was torn to pieces. The priestess told him that he had held a weapon in his hand all his life and had found himself in similar situations more than once. He knew it himself. They couldn't live without it. So what was the point of constantly getting worked up? At that moment, the Orc told Satis that he promised her that he would lay the most beautiful flowers on her grave. Just then, the wind blew, as if humming a funeral march. The girl, resolutely walking toward him, said, I don't think so. If anyone was going to die today, it was him. She activated the 7th Paradise skill and summoned it to raise the curtain. Upon her summoning, a multitude of magical circles and patterns instantly appeared, on the ground, to the sides, and in the air. Even the protagonist and Chiome were wary. The Orc screamed in confusion, asking what she, a moron, was thinking. Satis began casting a spell, and his weapon suddenly began to break. He looked at it in bewilderment, unable to believe it. His axe had suddenly begun to crumble. Could this really be Satis's magic? But that was impossible. The girl activated direct hit, and with a sharp blow of her fist, struck the enemy with such force that he began to choke from lack of air. Continuing to chant, she accelerated, appeared behind him, and unleashed a fire attack. The Orc roared in pain, panicking as he thought. First his axe, and now a fire attack. He screamed, what's going on? Where did she even learn that? Shoto couldn't believe his eyes either. Was that really a high-class speed spell? It's magic that not only makes its wielder move faster, but also doubles their casting speed. The girl thought she wouldn't be surprised if that's what everyone thought now. However, it wasn't at all what they thought. Satis activated her acceleration and attacked the Orc. Her speed was so high that it felt like he was being attacked from all sides at once. He thought angrily, I need to activate my defense against her damn attacks immediately. But flying back from her blows again, he realized it was too late. She was moving too fast. He wouldn't have time. At that moment, he lost sight of her. Looking back, he shouted at her. Where is she? How is she even staying on her feet after all his blows? Satis grinned, appearing right before him, and thought, a speed spell, supreme magic, they say. She would have said quite the opposite. The essence of her special power is that it significantly slows time around its caster, without affecting them personally. And the closer an enemy is to the caster, the slower time flows for them. For living beings caught in the area of effect, this happens unnoticed. They don't even realize anything is wrong. That's why, to ordinary people, she moves with inhuman speed. They can't even follow her blows. To her, they all look like sluggish, inert oafs. A supreme art in every sense, one that will make everyone doubt the existence of gods on this mortal earth. Even a second's delay seems an eternity in her eyes. The Orc shouted angrily at her. He doesn't know what kind of magic this is, but it won't help her. He won't be fooled by these tricks. One moment, and all his efforts will be in vain. Just one moment. Satis answered him with a smirk. What is he saying? Let him forgive her. But he speaks so slowly that the meaning of his words is lost before she can even hear them. He thinks his rings are protected from such spells? Well, if so, they will make it easier. Satis activated her magical strike on his jewelry, which immediately shattered into tiny fragments. She, dodging the possible hit of the fragments, realized that no more than 3 minutes had passed since the activation of the 7th Paradise, and her strength was already waning. She needed to end this quickly. She turned and looked at the protagonist, from whom a light emanated, giving her support. Satis thought that this light, like a guiding star, was guiding her through the darkness. Her, who always kept herself apart from everyone else. Everything she had achieved up until this day, the strength she had brought into battle, It was all thanks to the protagonist being by her side. Turning to the orc, she told him, well, he only had a few seconds to live. Brace yourself. This is going to hurt a little. The girl activated a powerful magical fireball and aimed it at the enemy. The orc panicked, thinking, this can't be happening. What could have happened? Where could he have gone so wrong? What did he do wrong? He had done everything perfectly until the very end. These were his final thoughts. The fiery flames engulfed him, and he was finished. Satis collapsed to the ground, unable to feel her legs. The protagonist cried out her name in fear and rushed to her, asking if she was okay. Satis, catching her breath and regaining her composure, answered him. For the first time, she felt that she had tried her best. The protagonist praised her. She was doing well. He never doubted her. Chioma smiled mysteriously. Satis touched MC's cheek with her hand in gratitude and smiled at him, pleased with his words. On the way to the Demon King's palace, the Griffin watched the battered army return home. Goboroku, who was walking ahead, turned, looked at the warriors, and thought, how terrifying. Having suffered a crushing defeat, having lost their leaders in the final battle, and barely escaping with their lives, the few remaining soldiers, exhausted from grievous wounds, headed back to the palace. The goblin thought, however, that even if they managed to return, nothing good awaited them there. The wounded warriors howled in despair, pain, and hopelessness. Goboroku noted with irritation that everyone had the expressions of sinners heading straight to execution. Sebek laughed, and the goblin turned angrily, glared at him, and said, let them just look at him. He's having fun, huh? Doesn't he even notice what's happening around him? Although he's an elite fighter, not a core member, so perhaps he really has nothing to fear. In a way, he even envies him. The boy had told him, isn't this little Shoto so charming? The goblin was surprised. What was he talking about? Sebek exclaimed, what if he wasn't? For once he was finally happy. If only he knew how he felt. This feeling he couldn't describe it. Finally he had found him, his perfect opponent. And he was sure the feelings were mutual. He wanted to kill him just as much. And that hungry look of his, they were like two peas in a pod. You could even say they were kindred spirits. Sebek had shouted the last words almost in a state of euphoria, and Goboroku had looked at him in bewilderment. The boy, dancing, had said, they would have more fun with little Shoto. The goblin thought irritably, well, yes. For Sebek, battles had always been like a sip of water for the dehydrated. He'd spent his entire life trying to find an enemy who could match his strength. He'd likely joined the demon army for the same reason. There had been no talk of loyalty to the king from the start. Was his head truly filled with nothing but battles and wars? Suddenly, the monster at the front of the squad stopped abruptly, as if frozen in place, and hiccuped in terror. Then he screamed, humans, where did so many of them come from? The second in command shouted at the squad, stop panicking. They were warriors who had sworn allegiance to their king. Everyone hold the line. They'll hold. Sebek laughed. How curious. A bunch of pathetic weaklings, nothing more. It was high time to cool their ardor a bit. He grabbed his weapon and charged at the enemy, saying, well, little Shoto will have to wait for him a little longer, and when fate brought them together again, he'd be much stronger than he is now. For his sake, he'll become stronger. While he was shouting these words, he destroyed half the enemy. After that, he finished off the rest, stood beside them, and, throwing his head back, roared at the sky. Goboroku looked at him in amazement, then thought with a smile, he's a damn demon. The one from the old legends, born from the mixing of human and demonic blood. At least, he had no other guesses. Meanwhile, Reed was quickly driving the cart through the forest. He saw a village up ahead and was overjoyed. Entering the settlement, he stopped and jumped off the cart, heading for one of the houses. A passing villager looked at him intently. The villagers began to mutter among themselves, let everyone see, he's a hero. What could he possibly need in such a remote place, especially without an escort? I felt so sorry for him. He's so thin. The woman thought in surprise, could this really be a hero? The owner of the house came out and told Reed he must be tired from the journey. Let him come into his house without any embarrassment and rest as long as he needed. The hero accepted the invitation and entered the house. There, he sat down in a chair, clutched his head, and rocking back and forth began to mutter excitedly. He had done nothing wrong. It wasn't his fault. Suddenly, Macron's voice rang out from the darkness. He told Reed that, judging by everything, he was at a crossroads. He was completely lost. The boy shuddered in surprise, jumped up, and seeing the man sitting across from him, asked him in fear, who is he? Phantom Macron calmly told him his name. The boy exclaimed, but he's dead. The man smiled and replied, perhaps. However, he would advise him to worry more about himself than about him. What did he think? Reed was sweating from the strain, thinking, this is impossible. Is he hallucinating? Right, he's just a figment of his imagination. They looked at each other, and the Phantom Makran continued. Until now, he had devoted all his strength to serving people. He lived, bravely bearing this heavy heroic burden on his shoulders. But where is he heading now? Reed exclaimed in irritation. This isn't true. His plan to overthrow the demonic army is perfect. He only stumbled slightly. It happened by accident. Makran drawled, is that so? If that's the case, then how does he intend to fix it? Let him tell him what his comrades did to deserve this fate. For what sins did he treat them like this? Why did he let them die? Reed recalled the recent events and, in horror, screamed at the Phantom, telling him to stop this and get out of here. He's not real. This is all a lie. He's dead. He should be dead. He thinks he can intimidate him? Phantom Macron cut off his panicked speech and told him to calm down and try to remember why he even decided to go on this journey. What happened to him, to his psyche, after Shoto and Hudora abandoned him? He should calm his anger and try to think rationally. Reed covered his ears with his hands and screamed at him to shut his mouth. Let him disappear from his sight. He didn't care. No, he was just a ghost. Phantom shook his head sadly, clutched his forehead and said, he was worthless. He feared loneliness more than death. He had been heading straight for the abyss for a long time now. He should remember how many innocent people had fallen at his hand, and at the hand of Angelic. Why did they do all this? Had he even thought about it? Hearing silence in response, he looked at Reed, whose tears were streaming down his face, and added that the real monster here was him. The boy couldn't take it anymore and screamed hysterically, telling him to shut his mouth. He had no other choice. It wasn't his fault. They were trying to get in his way, so he had to move them out of the way. He hadn't done anything wrong. It seemed he was going crazy. His excuses were interspersed with hysterical laughter. He said everything was going according to plan. The orcs, he was fine. He was only giving the humans the freedom they so dreamed of. He just wanted justice, and he wouldn't let anyone get in the way. At that moment, two villagers saw Reed's cart. The first said to the second, just take a look. It's the cart the hero arrived in. It looks pretty old, doesn't it? The second man agreed. The first began to wonder if it had worn out during the long journey. They didn't know what he had been through, although it looked more like the cart was simply falling apart from age. Suddenly, he noticed a symbol and brought it to his comrade's attention. The latter asked him, perplexed, what was wrong. The first one said, it seems to be a trademark, the sign of Libra. But why is a hero riding a trade cart? Meanwhile, the villager stood in front of the door to Reed's room. She thought with admiration, hero. Finally, the day had come when they met. She couldn't stop thinking about him ever since she heard he was setting off on a long and dangerous journey. What must it have been like if he'd returned so emaciated? Poor thing. Of course, she wasn't the kind of beauty heroes throw themselves at, but she didn't seem so hopeless. She hoped she could at least help him relax a little, and in the process, get to know him a little better. Taking courage, she knocked on the door and called him. No one answered. She entered the room and told him that dinner was ready. She wanted to ask him if they could go out for dinner together, but the words died on her lips. In the dark room, Reed sat in the corner, sword at the ready. His expression was fearful and tense. That was the last thing she saw in her life. He jumped out at her like a rabid beast. Then he began to calm himself, as if he were in a nightmare. In it, the damned demon in the form of Angelic lured him with sweet words. Reed felt a slight tremor run through him. He rubbed his face and thought, okay, he needs to calm down. It was a dream. After all, Angelic is dead. He looked at his hand and was terribly scared. Was that blood? His palm was stained with something red. He saw the villager lying on the floor, blood flowing from her wounds. The girl was dead. Reed recoiled from her in horror and screamed loudly. Phantom Macron clutched his head and uttered the hero's name with condemnation. The boy hastily began to defend himself. No, it wasn't him. There was some mistake. Phantom, unable to contain himself, shouted at him, asking where he thought the mistake was. This was all his doing. She was worried about him, came to check on him, and this is the result. He did this of his own free will. How could the truth he fought for have degenerated into something like this? And he dares call it justice. He couldn't care less about others. If something doesn't go his way, he immediately starts passing judgment on them, doesn't he? Reed, like a madman, began babbling. No, it wasn't him. He was only really trying for world peace. Phantom Macron asked him then, why did he kill another innocent person for the sake of that very peace? Let him just admit that he'll never be the same again. Reed stared at him, his eyes wide, feverish. Phantom continued, let him reject the past and repent of his crimes. That's his only path to salvation. Let him forget that he was once a hero. From now on, his entire life must be dedicated to atoning for his sins. Perhaps he will have to pay dearly for this, more dearly than he thinks, but at least this will help him turn away from the wrong path. If he's ready for it, then let him take his hand and he will lead him. With these words, Phantom Macron extended his hand. Reed repeated in confusion, atonement? Then he grinned and exclaimed, does he even understand what he's saying? The Phantom looked in surprise at Reed, who had suddenly changed and protested. No, not that. Let him stop. He doesn't know what he's doing. The hero, as if under a spell, said, he hasn't done anything wrong. Removing obstacles is an integral part of any journey. He has overcome them, and now no one can stop him. The Phantom told him to think again. If he lets him disappear, he will never see him again. Reed said contritely, how annoying this man is. He just wants justice to finally prevail. It's all for the best. He hears that? And he can't hide his true nature any longer. Now, he'll make it disappear. Reed activated a magical strike and finished off the Phantom, after which he chuckled casually and said, well done. Feeling much better, he exclaimed, yes, he is a hero, the hero of this filthy world. Nothing will stop him anymore, and it doesn't matter how many pathetic humans he has to kill for it. Oh yes, he should hide this girl. He picked her up and threw her out the window, after which he carefully washed away the blood and erased all traces of the crime. Then he washed himself, tidied himself up, looked in the mirror, and said with a smile, "Perhaps this will do. And now, it's time for him to have some refreshment." When he went down to the table, Reed apologized to everyone for his tardiness. They asked him, "Where is the resident?" The boy responded with a sweet smile, and she invited him to lunch before running off. She said she'd grab a few things and come back. Apparently, she wanted to show him something. The villager also told him he didn't have to wait for her, and to go ahead. Well, enough talk. Better get back to eating. Someone remarked that he smelled something. Reed laughed and said it might be the potions, and they should forgive him. Apparently, he'd been traveling for so long that he'd completely forgotten the rules of etiquette. After that, the boy began eating with pleasure. After a while, Satis, who was regaining her strength, apologized to the protagonist for seeming a little overtired. The protagonist replied that no, she should forgive him, if only he'd insisted and fought the Orc King himself. The girl was outraged that he'd say such a thing. This was something she should have overcome on her own. It wouldn't be right for her to shift this responsibility onto his shoulders, would it? She added that she would rest today and try to recover, and tomorrow they would continue the search. MC wanted to object, but seeing the girl's determined face, he said, "Okay, fine. Let her rest and not think about anything." Satis smiled and said they had a deal. He exclaimed, by the way, he was going to take a walk around the city, have a look around. If he finds anything worth noting, he'll definitely tell her. The girl wanted to object. She was worried about him. But the protagonist told her, "Oh well, a simple reconnaissance mission never hurt anyone. He's certainly capable of that." The girl said, "Okay, just let him not do anything stupid. And let him try to return before nightfall, okay?" The protagonist promised her this. Satis took off her glasses, placed them carefully on the nightstand, and fell asleep. Shoto came to the ancient ruins of Hopi Mez. He stopped, looked around the place, and thought. Most of the old buildings had fallen into disrepair, and only one of the entire complex remained. The city seemed to stand on the border of two worlds, combining the spirits of the past and present. That mysterious letter had said that if he went here, he would find something that would help him choose the right path. I think that's what it said. He thought of Satis. I wish she would get better soon. When they first met, she was very weak, but not to the extent she was now. He probably wouldn't have survived in this world without her. At that moment, he saw a familiar figure and exclaimed in surprise, "Chiome, is that her?" The girl smiled and said, "It's his voice. It's Shoto, right? What is he doing here? And where did he lose his comrade Satis? Is she resting perhaps?" He answered, "Yes, you could say that." MC asked her, "Where is she going?" Chiome told him she wasn't going anywhere yet. She was busy with business. She was a priestess after all. With her prayers, she rid the house of evil spirits and misfortunes, and she earned money for it too. But you can't earn much with prayers, just pennies. If that money wasn't enough, she'd look for another job, maybe for food. The protagonist was surprised. Did such a job even exist? He added admiringly, "She's so amazing. She has so many talents." The girl laughed and said as far as she could see, it seemed that not only was Satis not well, but he himself was far from in good health. She patted his head and asked if she was right. He wasn't dying, of course, but a day of rest, good food and sleep wouldn't hurt. He'd feel better right away. MC sheepishly replied, "Well, there is something, but he's not well because Satis isn't feeling well." It made his heart feel heavy, like cats scratching at him. Chiome looked at him, laughed, and said, "That's a lame answer. He shouldn't give up. Let him pull himself together." She bought some fruit and offered it to him. The protagonist was surprised, but the girl told him she was treating him. He should eat a little, and then go and give Satis a proper smile. It wouldn't hurt her now. The protagonist hesitated, looking at the fruit, and told her he felt a bit awkward. Chiome told him, "Don't even think about refusing. Children need to eat well to stay in shape. He should stop acting like a fool and let him relax already." He said, "Okay," and thanked her. Chiome smiled and wished them luck, and with that, they parted. The protagonist, biting into an apple, thought, the girl is right. He shouldn't try to overextend himself. After a while, the protagonist thought he'd explored almost the entire city, but still hadn't found anything special. Maybe he should try going deeper into the street. There was still one unexplored spot left. MC headed there resolutely. Getting closer, he spotted a church with a large stone wall behind it. He took a closer look and wondered what it was. Something carved into the stones. Totems? For some reason, this place made him uneasy, but he'd try to look around. Maybe he'd find something worthwhile. With a confident stride, he entered the church, where he was met warily by a crowd of children. They pointed their pikes at him and ordered him to stand still and not move. Lami stepped forward. The others stood behind him. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Who are they?" He didn't recall seeing them in the city. He realized they were amateurs, too tense, and they didn't know how to hold a weapon. However, getting into a fight with them would be a bad idea. It would only bring trouble on Satis's head. Lami said sternly to him, "Can't he hear? Quickly, put your hands up." MC thought maybe they were just guarding this place. But where was their leader then? The protagonist raised his hands and asked the boy, "Like this? So what were they going to do now?" Are they just gonna stand there like that? Or are they going to take him prisoner? The boys started arguing among themselves, and really, what should they do? Lami cursed them and shouted at the protagonist to use his brain. They would take him where he needed to go. He went behind Shoto, jabbed him in the back with his pike, and told him to go forward. The protagonist asked him about his weapon. He didn't want it taken away, did he? Lami hesitated, puzzled, and replied, well yeah. MC made a sharp turn, twisted the boy's arms behind his back, pushed him face down to the ground, and took his weapon. Lami didn't even have time to process what had happened. He only realized it when he was on the floor. His friends were also stunned. The protagonist sighed, released the boy, and clarified, so, he understands this is their territory? If so, he apologized. He was just strolling around the city and decided to take a look around. He had no intention of fighting or taking their territory, so they should forgive him if he bothered them. He'll leave now, and everything will be fine. Lami shouted at him to wait and grabbed his arm. The boys surrounded him and started shouting at him. Is he really that strong? He doesn't want to become one of them? Let him be their friend. Since he's so strong, they'll accept him as a brother. Let him be their brother. Lami told him authoritatively. But first, they'll take him to their leader, okay? The protagonist exclaimed in surprise. What are they saying? What other one of them? What do they want from him? Lami interrupted him and said, come on! Their leader is very good. He'll definitely like him. When Lami welcomed him into one of the rooms, he turned to his boss and told him, they brought someone here. He's very strong. Jake, who was standing in the back of the room in front of the altar, slowly turned towards them. He told the protagonist to forgive them. After all, these kids had dragged him here, hadn't they? The protagonist responded, but he'd been the one trespassing on their property. So, no big deal. Jake grinned and remarked, it turns out he was a kind person. He patted the boys on the head and told him his name, adding that he was the so-called leader of these kids. Then Jake asked him, what was his name? The MC told him his name, and Jake exclaimed in surprise. Could he really be that same Shoto of the Destroying Storm? The legendary guy who wielded a magic sword? No. That couldn't be true. Was he sleeping? The protagonist thought in confusion. Legendary again? He told the guy to hold off on his big words. He was just an errand boy. Nothing heroically admirable. Jake told him not to be modest. By the way, does he have that sword? If possible, could he show them just once? Everyone wants to see it. The boys froze in place, excitedly anticipating. But the protagonist said a magic sword was a tool for fighting. He wouldn't draw it in a place like this. Jake exclaimed, oh come on. MC shouted decisively. He said no. Everyone jumped in surprise. Lami sat down on the box. Another boy hid behind him. The protagonist also crouched, and Jake said he was sorry he came in here without permission. And that's precisely why it was hard for him to ask such a thing. The boy rubbed the back of his head and said confusedly, so that's how it is. He understood. Let him forgive him. He also got carried away. The protagonist conciliatorily asked the boy's leader to tell him something. They already knew about him, but who were they themselves? Jake said sheepishly. Right, they didn't introduce themselves. He spread his arms wide and exclaimed, welcome to the Revolutionary Army. MC looked at him, dumbfounded. The guy laughed at his reaction and remarked, welcome, you're surprised. Those gathered here were those who had lost their parents in the war, orphans abandoned to their fate. So many among them had heard of him. The protagonist cautiously asked him. He said it was the Revolutionary Army, so he was really going to fight the country? Jake exclaimed. Exactly. They would fight adults, those who did this to them. The fact that he, such a man, had come to them, it was fate. Jake invited him to experience this world with them. The protagonist was dumbfounded by such a statement. He looked around the ruins where the boys were. Jake continued, these adults consider children like them to be insects. They're still a small group, but with him, they can change this world. Their actions can set this world on the right path. He can save the children who suffer because of war, politics, and the selfish desires of adults. The boy bowed to him and continued, asking him to help them. The protagonist replied that he should forgive him, but he wasn't interested in either revolution or revenge. Jake exclaimed in surprise, but why? He should know how selfish adults are. Isn't he disappointed in them? Doesn't he hate them? Shoto said decisively that he, too, had been used for their own ends because he was just a child. He had been through cruel and bitter things, but he didn't feel like he had to do anything about it. Moving toward the exit, MC told Jake, excuse me, there's a man waiting for him. It's time for him to go. The boy's leader tried to stop him, confused, shouting, he shouldn't have burdened him so quickly. Come see them tomorrow, and they'll discuss everything. He begged him, don't abandon them. The protagonist left the church and strode resolutely toward the city. Turning around, he saw Jake surrounded by the boys watching him go. When Shoto returned home, he told Satis about all this. The girl drawled, I see, so these kids noticed him? The protagonist replied sadly, that's true. He had no desire to get involved, but considering their circumstances, he didn't know what to do. Satis said, sooner or later, they'll be arrested. At worst, they'll be charged with a serious crime. The MC asked her, is there anything they can do for them? His heart bleeds as he imagines them suffering. Satis said thoughtfully, I need to think about it. He should meet them at least once. Besides, they'd asked him to come see them tomorrow too. Apparently they are his fans. The protagonist muttered, hoping this time would be better. At that moment, the door to the room swung open, and Shiom entered with a cheerful greeting, a bottle of wine and fruit, apologizing for her intrusion. Satis exclaimed in surprise, what's wrong? The girl replied, No, she just came to check on her. Tossing her the fruit, she exclaimed, let her take this. It's a token for coming so far together. Well, now they'll have a glass of wine and have fun. The allies couldn't refuse her, and after a short while, they were having a wonderful time, drinking, chatting about everything, laughing, and joking. Finally, Chioma exclaimed, how long has it been since she'd relaxed like this? She would have happily stayed with them longer, but she had to go. The protagonist called out to her and asked if she was okay. Should he walk her home? The priestess cheerfully replied that everything was fine. She preferred to stroll alone in her current state. The protagonist remarked that she was an adult. She should take care of herself. The girl exclaimed with a laugh. Yes, she knows. This is just adult logic that can't be rejected. It was, after all, the opposite of logic. The girl left, and the MC went out to check if she had reached her room. After that, he said to Satis, it seems everything went well. Chioma is a walking disaster. The girl laughed and spoke, and judging by the conversation, she turned out to be a surprisingly funny person, right? Just like she was straight out of Benjamin Village. Shoto noticed, and that was true. He added, the smell of sake is heavy here. Could he open the window? Satis exclaimed. Of course. Opening it and looking out the window, the protagonist admiringly noted how beautiful the night was. You can even see the stars. Looking at Satis, he said he'd probably go to bed too. He had to get up early tomorrow. The girl addressed him by name, held out her arms, and beckoned him to her. He felt a jolt of shock. He exclaimed in surprise. What had she just said? What was she doing all of a sudden? He could sleep on his own. She told him she hadn't meant it that way. He'd had such a hard day today. She thought he could use a little reward. The protagonist, frightened, objected. No need. Let her not worry about it. He was only doing what he had to do, and that was it. Satis asked in bewilderment. He didn't want to sleep with her? He eventually lay down next to her, but his whole body was tense as a string. The girl stroked his head and told him not to be so nervous. He grumbled back, telling her to leave him alone. He was already trying his best. She smiled at him and said how cute he was. He'd even slept on her lap. Why hadn't he gotten used to it yet? Shoto told her that those were two different things. Satis remarked, then, I wonder if it would be okay if she hugged him? The protagonist didn't even have time to object. Satis grabbed him and hugged him. He felt like he was about to die of shame, embarrassment, and fear. He tried to pull away from her, but the girl mockingly said, what a spoiled boy. The protagonist suddenly understood. He felt so calm. As he drifted off, he murmured to her that she would forgive him for having to break the ban. Satis reassuringly told him it was okay. Today was okay. Looking at him tenderly, she silently wished him sweet dreams and thought that tomorrow they would try hard together. With these words, she released him from her embrace, took his hand in hers, settled in next to him, and also fell into a deep sleep. The next day, the allies set out for the abandoned church. When they arrived, Satis adjusted her glasses and said excitedly, I see. So that's what the view was like. Since this place was connected to the Wendigo, she had imagined something a little different. The protagonist thought with surprise, she really does like these ruins. She looks so happy. At that moment, Jake grabbed the protagonist from behind, dragged him along, and told him they needed to talk. MC was indignant. What was he doing so suddenly? The guy pointed at Satis and asked him, this woman, what's his connection to her? Shoto answered, perplexed. She's someone close to him. He was talking about her yesterday. Jake cut him off mid-sentence and pointed out that he wasn't talking about that. He didn't say she was such a stunning beauty. The protagonist was confused and said, well, yeah, he didn't say that. The guy was indignant. Not only didn't he say that, and he's always with such a beauty, the protagonist told him they were looking for a place where they could both be in peace. But it was pretty difficult right now. They came here to make a decision. Jake said, it's not fair, he's so lucky. All the boys looked at Satis admiringly while she examined something in the ruins. MC, seeing the delight on the boys' faces, thought with a smile that he'd had the same feeling when they'd just begun their journey. Because Satis was so charming, anything could happen. At that moment, she called out to him and asked what he was doing there. Could he please come over to her? As the protagonist approached her, the girl pointed to the altar and said she thought there was a passage behind it. But these were such ancient ruins, there was a risk the entire building would collapse if he acted carelessly. Jake exclaimed, then let him take her inside. He thought he'd figure out where the danger lay. The boys began to indignantly tell him it was so unfair. What kind of leader was he? He sternly told them, this isn't fun. He, as their leader, would take on the duty of protecting Shoto and Satis. The protagonist thought in surprise, so that's what makes him a leader. The allies discovered Satis was right. They'd found a secret passage. Descending, protagonist told Jake that, despite being the leader of the revolutionary army, he seemed like a cheerful and intelligent child. The boy replied that he was, indeed, happy yesterday. But today was different. Satis laughed and remarked, was he really so happy that Shoto had come to see them? Jake said, not quite because of that. She chuckled again and asked him if he was sure of it. Jake, leading the way, turned around and said, well, at least he saw that there was a spacious hall in the background. He raised a torch, illuminating the room. Statues of horsemen stood there. Satis exclaimed admiringly, this is a temple dedicated to the virgin goddess Chatalhok. She is believed to be like the Mother Earth goddess who gives birth to many lives and promises fertility to the earth, thus being the opposing pair to the god Ahaspatel, the Wendigo of death. It's a shame there's little information about this goddess, as she's quite ancient. The protagonist remarked in surprise. I see. So this is the goddess associated with Hospital, but was this the very place for the test? The girl answered him. Apparently, no. At that moment, Jake told them that he might not quite understand their purpose, but perhaps this thing was what they were looking for. He pointed to a broken object, in front of which was an entrance leading down. The boy beckoned them to him. The allies carefully descended the stairs. Before their eyes appeared a small pool, like an artificial fountain containing a black mass. Jake remarked, it's creepy here, so they didn't approach this place. He turned to Satis and asked her if she knew anything about this. The girl thanked him and replied that she would find out now. The protagonist carefully examined the pool's contents. Jake approached him and told him it was probably a place for some kind of ritual. It wasn't very big, just an element and a fountain. MC agreed, picking up a stone and adding, what is this pitch-black fountain anyway? He threw the stone into the fountain with all his might, and to everyone's surprise, it shattered into tiny pieces. Satis called out indignantly, saying they shouldn't do whatever they wanted. The protagonist apologized to her and said, but the stone they threw into the fountain shattered. How could that be? The girl mused. So that's what that sound was. It really was strange. She's afraid there might be a connection to that. She read the inscription on the slab standing nearby. It said that 4 evil spirits enchanted by death rest here. May the ones similarly enchanted by death go to the fountain. Satis said in amazement, a source that allows only a select few to enter. The protagonist suggested that perhaps this was the testing grounds. Jake repeated the word test in surprise and asked the protagonist, what did he just say? MC said, to say he'll save the world would be an exaggeration. There's someone very strong, and he thinks he can't defeat them until he passes the tests. He walked to the edge of the pool, looked inside, and said, well, it's worth a try. The protagonist jumped onto the altar, told his allies that he was leaving, and jumped into the fountain. Satis and Jake simultaneously cried out in surprise, but managed to catch him. Satis shouted at him, what is he doing? That's not right. Jake asked him to calm down. You can't rush this. The protagonist irritably replied, yes, he understands everything. Let him go. She indignantly asked him, what the hell is he thinking? It could have been dangerous, jumping down there like that. Jake had noticed. That's exactly it. What if he'd suffered the same fate as that stone? MC responded to them in confusion. Oh, come on. What were they so worried about? He wouldn't be able to pass the trials if he didn't dive in. They had no other options. Satis wanted to object, but the protagonist took her hand in his and asked her not to worry. He promised her that he'd be back soon. The girl told him with tears in her eyes, but he could get hurt. He said that if he got hurt, then when he returned, he would lie in her lap and be healed. Satis smiled through her tears and asked him not to say such strange things at a time like this. Jake cleared his throat and was indignant. They could have remembered that. In fact, he was here too. The allies laughed and apologized. The guy approached Shoto and asked him with concern, so he was still going? Let him not force himself. Unlike them, he has someone who will wait for him. The protagonist said his name with confusion. Jake continued, more jokingly, after this he could not call him to their army again, really. Let him definitely survive and return to them. The protagonist promised him this, and added that he, of all people, was definitely not going to give up. He looked at the boy and suddenly asked him when he returned, would Jake become his friend? He extended his hand to the surprised leader of the boys. The boy swallowed convulsively and answered with a smile. He would be very happy about that. They shook hands, and Jake told him when he returned, let him be friends with the rest of the boys too. They will be happy. MC promised him this. Approaching the altar and climbing onto it, he waved to his friends and told them, well, he's off. Satis anxiously told him, let him definitely return. He promised them this. The protagonist nodded to her with a smile and dove down. When he opened his eyes, he saw sand everywhere, scattered here and there with the remains of bones. He wondered in surprise, where was he? Perhaps this was some kind of illusion? However, the heat was real. His mouth was dry. Where was the escape? At that moment, the voice of a spirit named Withering Sorrow rang out, declaring that the heart would gradually dry up from endless trials and hardships. Then the spirit itself appeared and continued, saying that ultimately, this would create a vast void in his heart, and instill ruthlessness within him. The protagonist stared at it in amazement. The spirit added, a dry heart cannot shed tears, therefore, it will never be satisfied. The soul is trapped in a heart parched from incurable wounds and sorrows, and there will be no end to it. The spirit extended its hand and said, sorrow is truly lonely. The MC drew his sword and prepared to attack. He recalled the inscription on the altar and realized that one of the 4 spirits stood before him. The spirit continued. Its name was Searing Sorrow. After these words, it lifted a lantern from a human skull and added, those who mourn cannot shed tears. Does he hear their pain? A bright light began to emanate from the lantern, cutting into the eyes, and the sand turned into a sandstorm. Shoto covered his nose and mouth with his hand, thinking, this heat, even though he was far from the spirit, the effect was still powerful. Did this mean he was attacked immediately upon entering this space? This skull lantern not only summons a scorching storm, but also absorbs moisture from the surrounding environment. A prolonged battle is tantamount to death, so he would easily defeat him. If he waited until the enemy's physical strength was exhausted, and then cut him down when he could no longer move. The enemy activated all his magical power, laughing maliciously. The protagonist, dodging the smite, thought he hadn't felt this way in a long time. For the time spent with Satis had changed him greatly, and now he must return to who he was and fight mortal danger without fear. Taking a fighting stance, the protagonist thought he just needs to focus on destroying it. The enemy began to approach him. MC noted his heavy steps. Did this mean he couldn't move freely while he controlled the wind and moisture? The spirit had asked him, a boy enchanted to death, if he could break through its storm. Could his withered heart heal his sorrow? If not, then nothing would remain of him but a dry corpse. The protagonist replied, "Dry heart, dry wind, huh? It's much better now, don't you think? He will survive, no matter what." With these words, the protagonist lunged at the enemy and swung his magic sword. The spirit deftly dodged his attack and let out a surprised cry, attacking him in return. MC also dodged his blow and began attacking the enemy with redoubled force. He tied a handkerchief over his breathing passages and began to break through the spirit's attack. He remembered being ordered into a sandstorm as a child. His body was so hot he felt like he was about to burn, and the sweat that poured out instantly dried and disappeared. No matter the cost, everything would be decided in one lightning-fast attack. Breaking through the deadly storm, he approached the spirit. The enemy remarked in amazement, "Interesting. He'd better accept his trial with sorrow." The spirit spun on the spot, scorching the protagonist, and vanished. The protagonist looked around in confusion, searching for it. Suddenly, the spirit appeared behind him, weapon in hand, and said, "The sorrow that grips your heart, but does not fill your eyes with tears. This landscape will forever remain dry." Shoto thought in confusion. This is bad. Was he really going to attack him with a weapon? The enemy rushed at him. A roar echoed around him, and a sandy dust rose up, burning everything in its path. Suddenly, the spirit itself appeared right in front of the protagonist. They clashed face to face, crossing their weapons. The protagonist lunged, damaging the enemy, and the spirit retreated. MC knew he had the advantage in close combat, but not in this case. He fell to one knee, catching his breath. The enemy looked at him with a smile and began chanting a spell. "Oh sorrow, oh mourners, let them come from all sides, and go from all sides." Then he held out his lantern, looked at the protagonist with pity, and said, "Well, now he too will disappear, poor soul." The lantern began to emit a powerful scorching light, but the protagonist rose from his seat and extinguished it with his magical power. The spirit, surprised, noted what had just happened. The protagonist, taking a stance, told him to forgive him, but he couldn't find the words to sympathize with his sorrow. He was simply too dense to speak intelligently, but he must destroy him at all costs, for the sake of the path that awaited him. Shoto thrust his weapon forward and summoned the magical sword, abundance, and rain.